Chapter 28. Ji Mingran watched the scene in front of her, and did not speak. She slowly ate her food, but her gaze would occasionally land on Jinwan. It seemed like she had to change her strategy in the future. Brainwashing Jinwan to stay away from Mo Jingshan, and then think of ways to divorce him would most likely not work. Dad, drinking more soup is good for the body. Jinwan personally scooped a bowl of soup for Ji Hongwen, and placed it in front of him. Ji Hongwen saw that Jinwan had really changed a lot, and felt comforted in his heart. This child was so full of ideas now. Could it be that she really had some plans for buying Han Tinyuan's two companies? Everyone had their own thoughts during this meal. After the meal, Jinwan was about to call the Yu Garden when Ji Hongwen called her to the study. Speak, what's going on with those two companies? You're my Ji Hongwen's daughter. If you make a fool out of yourself, you'll be throwing my face. Before Jinwan returned to the Ji home in the afternoon, she had specially printed out 2 documents. She took out the documents from her bag and placed them on the table. Dad, you have no way of predicting how the domestic property market and technology will develop in the next 10 years. Just looking at the real estate industry, the price of land and housing has been gradually rising since 3 years ago, and this trend will not stop. Right now, haven't the average prices of many properties dropped by a few %? Many experts predict that the real estate industry will soon become a bubble. They will lose as much as they invest. Don't blindly believe those so-called experts. Look at the data I gave you first. It won't be too late to give me an answer after. Ji Hongwen looked at the stack of documents, and then glanced at her. You've really made preparations. This is your daughter's first battle in the business world. Of course, I have to make thorough preparations and plans. I have to do this, and I will do it. I promise, I won't throw your face. Ji Hongwen looked at it for a while longer before he chuckled and said, All right, you have your father's boldness in the past. But how can you be sure that the economic trend for the next 10 years will be realized according to your budget and plan? If you miscalculate, have you thought about the consequences? Jinwan lowered her eyes and smiled mildly. All kinds of changes and business opportunities in the world in the next 10 years were in her mind. Taking advantage of the current stable capital and good connections in all aspects, the first thing she did was, of course, to firmly grasp the opportunity of the real estate industry in the next 10 years. Originally, she had never found an opportunity to start. That day, when she was at Han Tinyuan's place, she had coincidentally thought of his 2 companies that were about to be sold. Not only could he make him suffer in silence, but he could also push for the benefits he wanted. It could be considered as killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Since she was standing here, there must be a way to convince him. 2 hours later, walking out of the study, Jinwan glanced at the time. Dad, it's getting late. I'll head back first. Ji Hongwen had already read the documents she handed to him, and listened to her orderly summary. After that, he did not make a formal statement, but he did not reject her plan. It was obvious that his heart was wavering. Don't go. Stay at home tonight. In the study, Ji Hongwen said, Since you've just recovered from the cold 2 days ago, I'll have Jingshan pick you up tomorrow. As he spoke, he immediately called Mo Jingshan. Jinwan swallowed the words that were at the tip of her tongue. Since her father had already said so, if she did not let Mo Jingshan pick her up, he would most likely think too much and suspect that she was purposely coaxing him when she said she planned to live a good life. Several minutes later, Ji Hongwen walked out. I've already told Jingshan. Tonight you'll stay at the Ji home. He'll come pick you up tomorrow morning. Come early? Don't think I don't know what you're thinking. You're afraid of delaying his work, right? You brat, you've just gotten closer to Jingshan, and you're already siding with him. Jinwan's lips twitched. Were her current thoughts so obvious? Have you become muddle-headed? Tomorrow is the weekend. I think your heart has long flown back to the Yu Garden. What exactly did Mo Jingshan do to make you suddenly so willing? Jinwan's face heated up slightly. Dad. Seeing her blush, the boulder in Ji Hongwen's heart finally fell. This time she was truly sincere. It could be said that his heart was filled with comfort. If she had really caused his favorite son-in-law to disappear, and if they really divorced, who knew which girl would end up taking advantage of him in the future? Just thinking about it made his heart ache. Regarding Han Tianyuan's two companies, I can give you a chance to test the waters, but I have a condition. What condition? Within half a year, if you're unable to earn back this investment with interest, then you'll have to obediently continue learning financial management. The meaning behind his words was that if Jean Wan was unable to earn back this money with her own abilities, she could only obediently guard the family's company. He would not give her any chance to start her own business. Ji Hongwen's personality had always been stubborn. For him to relent this time was actually not easy. Jean Wan was silent for a moment before nodding. All right. At night, Jean Wan was in her room. She laid on the bed, tossing and turning, unable to fall asleep. Half a year, 30 million yuan. Earning back the investment with interest was actually not as easy as it was made out to be. 10 years ago today, there was a period of stagnation in the country's real estate industry. There was even a slight drop. Although it did not drop by much, it continued to rise crazily in the next few years. However, right now, she was stuck at a time when the transaction rate was very low. Thus, the deadline of half a year was a huge test for her. She really could not sleep. Jean Wan turned back to look at the time. It was already past 9 in the evening. Was Emo Jingshan at the Yu Garden or at the company? After being reborn, she had never been apart from him for a single night. Jean Wan tossed and turned for a moment. In the end, she laid on the bed and picked up her phone to give him a call. However, her fingers paused on the screen. Emo Corporation had many overseas collaborations. He often held international video conferences with his overseas partners at this time of the night. If she called him now, and he happened to be busy, wouldn't that be bad? After thinking for a moment, Jean Wan decided to just send him a message. However, it seemed like Emo Jingshan rarely looked at messages. TSK, who cared if he looked at it or not? Anyway, she could not sleep. Sending a message was just a way to resolve her lovesickness. Her fingers poked on the screen for a long time. Dear hubby, I miss you so much. 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 She thought for a long time before typing the words, Dear good hubby. She smiled with a red face as she poked the words on the screen. After sending it, Jean Wan could not help but laugh. She turned to lie on the bed and looked at the message that had already been sent. She laughed out loud. Who said that only Emo Jingshan could flirt with her? She could clearly flirt with him as well. A few minutes after the message was sent, Jean Wan got up to take a shower. All of a sudden, the phone on the bed rang. She turned to look, and her heart instantly palpitated. Chapter 29. Jean Wan rushed back to the bed, grabbing her phone to pick up the call. Can't sleep. Emo Jingshan's voice came from the phone. Under the bright night sky, his voice was strangely alluring. The moment Jean Wan heard his voice, her entire body softened as she lay on the bed. She held a pillow in her hand. Did you see the message I sent? It's already so late. Have you returned to the Yu Garden? No, something happened with the overseas business partner. I just finished a meeting. Emo Jingshan's voice was low. Then you should go back and rest early. You're working late again when I'm not home. Aren't you? Jean Wan could not help but mutter. I should be by your side every day. When it's time, I should take off your clothes and press you down on the bed. I won't let you go anywhere. Don't mention work. You can't even enter the study. The other side was silent for a moment. Then he chuckled softly and slowly. When do you plan to take off my clothes? I'm talking to you about serious matters. I'm asking you to sleep early. Emo Jingshan chuckled. But I'm more looking forward to you personally taking off my clothes before sleeping with me. Jean Wan buried her face into the pillow, listening to the movements on the other end. She sighed inwardly. She was clearly the one who took the initiative to flirt with Emo Jingshan. Why did it seem like he was flirting with her instead? He seemed to have already left the company. She could vaguely hear movements on the other side. He was most likely in the company's underground parking lot. Jean Wan could not bear to hang up, nor did she want to disturb his driving. She lay on the bed, narrowing her eyes to say, Put on your headphones before driving. There's no need to talk to me. You have to be careful when driving at night. Want to sleep? He asked. No, I can't sleep. Perhaps it's because I haven't returned to the G home for too long that I suddenly have insomnia. Jinwan lay on the bed lazily. It's really strange. The bed at home is clearly no different from the bed in the Yew garden. Why is it that I can't sleep lying on it? It's probably because the bed lacks me. Jinwan smiled, her eyes curved. She reached out to pull the large, white bear that she used to carry into her arms. She was quiet for a moment without speaking. After such a long silence, she did not know if he had already arrived at the Yew garden. But the two did not hang up. She said lazily, Yu, it seems like I can only let Mr. Bear carry me to sleep tonight. Mo Jingshan directly asked, What Mr. Bear? That's right. Other than you, the legal husband, the only one who has the right to climb into my bed is Mr. Bear. Jinwan said as she pinched the big white bear in her arms. She then took a look at the time and smiled. All right, you drive. I won't disturb you anymore. See you tomorrow. With that, Jinwan was about to hang up. But she really couldn't bear to. She thought that she should wait until he hung up before hanging up, so she quietly pressed the phone to her ear. However, after listening for a long time, Mo Jingshan did not seem to have hung up. Was he waiting for her to hang up? Jinwan smiled, and was about to move the phone away from her ear, when she suddenly heard Mo Jingshan's low voice. Come out, open the door. Jinwan pondered for a long time before jumping up from the bed. She turned and rushed to the window to look outside. Outside the Ji family's front yard, there were white car lights flashing by. In the darkness, she could vaguely tell that the car belonged to Mo Jingshan. Jinwan was shocked. That car is yours? You're here? Mrs. Mo, my clothes have already been prepared. You're welcome to take them off whenever you want. Mo Jingshan's voice was light and carried a hint of a smile. Before Jinwan could return to her senses, he had already hung up. Jinwan was stunned. So Mo Jingshan really came? The Mo Corporation was not far from the Ji family home. How did he arrive so quickly? He actually directly came over tonight? In the Ji family's front yard, the moment the housekeeper and helpers saw that it was Mo Jingshan's car, they rushed to open the door to welcome him. At this time, no one in the family had slept yet. Ji Hongwen heard the news and immediately went downstairs. Even Shen Haru and Ji Mengran were alarmed when they heard that Mo Jingshan had come to the Ji family home. Only Jinwan finally realized what was going on. She stared at the darkened phone screen for a long time before she finally managed to react. She rushed to run out. Brother Jingshan. Ji Mengran had just showered. She wore a thin pink negligee and walked over to welcome him. Why didn't you say hello before coming to the Ji family home? After Mo Jingshan entered, Ji Mengran directly stood in front of him, blocking his view of others. Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at her and ignored her. He turned to look at Ji Hongwen, who had already walked over, politely greeting him, Dad. Why did you come at this time? Ji Hongwen clearly did not expect Mo Jingshan to come to the Ji family home so late. You didn't return to the Yew garden? Did you come directly from the company? Mo Jingshan directly walked in, his gaze deep and quiet. The company is not far from here. Jinwan is here, so I came directly on the way. Yeah, Nwan only returned to the Ji family for a night. Mo, you can't bear to part with her? Shen Haru interrupted, her tone slightly strange. She really could not understand where Jinwan, that little brat, got her fortune from. Not only was she able to successfully marry someone like Mo Jingshan, she was even cared for so much by him. After seeking death and asking for a divorce for more than half a year, she was still Mo Jingshan's wife. The moment Jinwan came downstairs, she heard Shen Haru's unkind tone. As expected, this woman would put on a different face in front of her when she was not around. Since you're here, you should rest first. Auntie Qin, go call Jinwan down. Ji Hongwen was currently in a good mood. Both his daughter and son-in-law were here. It was truly a rare sight. Auntie Qin nodded. She was about to head upstairs when she saw that Jinwan had already come down. Eldest miss, Mr. Mo is here. Auntie Qin smiled at her. I know earlier on, we were on the phone. Jinwan did not hide anything. She headed downstairs and headed over. The first person she saw was Mo Jingshan, wearing a black trench coat over his well-fitted suit. This man, how could he be so handsome? Even a simple trench coat could look so good on her. Before she could meet his gaze, she heard Ji Mengran's voice forcefully interject. Brother Jingshun, it must be very cold outside tonight, right? It's already been many days since autumn. Did my sister's cold spread to you? Don't just focus on work. You have to take care of yourself. Mo Jingshun coldly and indifferently made an N sound. From start to finish, his gaze did not land on Ji Mengran. Instead, it moved past Ji Mengran, who was blocking his way, to look at Jin Wan, who was walking over. His brows were handsome as he stood there calmly looking at her. However, his gaze was only focused on her. Chapter 30. Why did you suddenly come? You scared me. Jin Wan walked forward, circling around Ji Mengran to stand by his side. Mo Jingshun held her hand, lowering his eyes to look at her. Your hands are so cold. And it's a little cold tonight. Earlier, I forgot to turn on the air conditioner. It's good that you're here to help me warm my hands. Jin Wan smiled as she spoke. In the blink of an eye, she looked like a spoiled wife. Brother Jingshun tonight. Ji Mengran was still excited that Mo Jingshun would come to the Ji home. No matter how they ignored her, she still wanted to speak to him. Ji Hongwen suddenly coughed, clearing his throat heavily. His expression was ugly. Mengran, look at what you're wearing. Jingshun is your brother-in-law. Why did you come down wearing so little? At this moment, everyone noticed that Ji Mengran was wearing a negligee with straps. It was a style that was close to those sexy pajamas. It was thin and short, revealing a large portion of her shoulder and collarbone. Even her chest was faintly discernible. The lower half of the skirt could barely cover a small portion of her thighs. It could not be any shorter. Earlier, his attention was focused on Mo Jingshun. Now that he had clearly seen what Ji Mengran was wearing, Ji Hongwen's expression was as black as the bottom of a pot. Dad, I was preparing to sleep earlier. When I heard that Brother Jingshun came, I immediately ran out. Ji Mengran was trying to explain when a thin coat was suddenly thrown over her head. She tugged the coat off her head, turning around to look at Jin Wan. She realized that this was the coat Jin Wan had worn when she came downstairs. Put it on. You might not be cold, but we all feel cold just by looking at it. Jin Wan's tone was calm. Thank you, sister. Ji Mengran could not find anything else to talk about. Her eyes secretly glanced at Mo Jingshun. She saw that his gaze did not land on her body. Not to mention her legs, he did not even glance at her shoulders. It's so cold. Jin Wan suddenly shivered. I didn't expect it to be so cold after taking off the coat. Dad, it's getting late. You guys should go back to sleep. Jingshun and I are going back to our room. Brother-in-law has just arrived. Sister, you're already dragging him back to our room? Ji Mengran muttered. Ji Hongwen glanced at Ji Mengran. So much. Hurry up and get dressed. Seeing that everyone was standing there, Auntie Qin took the initiative to say, why don't I go to the kitchen and cook a few bowls of supper? The weather has been really cold recently, so it's good to eat something warm before going to bed. Yes, Aunt Qin, hurry up and cook. Ji Mengran turned around and raised her hand in agreement. You guys go ahead. I've eaten too much tonight. I'm not hungry right now. Jingshun has also been busy at the company all day. It's already so late, so I won't be eating supper with everyone. Jin Wan's expression was calm as she held onto Mo Jingshun's hand. She did not give Ji Mengran any chance to approach. All right, go back to your rooms. Sister Qin, you don't have to do anything, Ji Hongwen said sternly. When Auntie Qin heard this, she stopped walking towards the kitchen. Ji Mengran finally managed to see Mo Jingshun. She wanted to find an opportunity to speak with him. But right now, they didn't even have the chance to sit together and look at him, let alone talk to him alone. Jin Wan looked at her with a faint glimmer in her eyes. Running downstairs dressed like that, with his father's old-fashioned personality, it was impossible for him not to be angry. My dear sister, you are too eager for quick success. You'll be easily exposed like this. Ji Mengran turned around unwillingly, only to see that Jin Wan was already speaking softly to Mo Jingshun. The two of them were actually whispering in each other's ears in front of so many people. They really did not know shame. Mo Jingshun was usually such a high and mighty person, but he actually spoiled Jin Wan so much. The more Ji Mengran watched, the angrier she became. But right now, she could not say or do anything. In the past, whenever Jin Wan returned home, she would argue with her father. Her father would always use his docile and obedient personality to compare with Jin Wan's willfulness and ignorance. Jin Wan would then angrily slam the door and leave. She would not show any face at all in the Ji family. Her father would also be angered to the point of wanting to chase Jin Wan out of the house. But now could it be that the wheel of fortune had turned? Jin Wan had become a caring little cotton-padded jacket. She had only come downstairs to see Mo Jingshan in her nightgown. But she was actually lectured in front of so many people. Which expert had taught Jin Wan exactly? Everyone could clearly see Jin Wan's proud and arrogant personality. But none of them hated her? Shunharu saw that Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan had already gone upstairs, and decided to speak softly by the side. Wan, this child is still so immature. Jing Shun came to the Ji family in the middle of the night. We should at least give him time to talk to the elders. She's still immature, and has implicated Jing Shun to the point where he seems to have no respect for his elders. Auntie Shun is right. Dad, what I meant earlier was that elder sister has gone overboard. Ji Mengran softly harumphed. Ji Hongwen's gaze was sharp as he looked at them. Are you done yet? Can't you see what time it is now? What words must be said so late at night? Shunharu saw that he was angry, and immediately softened her expression. She did not say anything more. This little hussy Jin Wan seemed to be getting more and more difficult to deal with. Ji Hongwen was also on Jin Wan's side, so it was better for her to speak less for now. Dad, shut up. Go back to your room. Ji Hongwen turned around, glaring at Ji Mengran even more harshly. Ji Mengran's expression changed. After being yelled at by her father, she trembled in fear, and did not dare to speak anymore. She felt slightly wronged and raised her eyes to look upstairs. She bit her lips unwillingly, and turned around to angrily rush back to her own room. The room door opened and closed. The light in the bedroom was gentle. Why did you suddenly come here? You didn't even tell me beforehand. Jin Wan turned back to glare at the person who had caused the entire family to be dumbfounded. Didn't you say you missed me? The moment she turned back, Mo Jingshan suddenly lowered his head. Jin Wan faltered slightly as she stared at the handsome face in front of her. The distance between the two was less than half a centimeter. This sudden closeness, and the man's scent assaulted her senses, causing her heart to jump. Realizing that this was the Ji family home, even though the door was closed, Jin Wan instinctively raised her hand to push him away. In the end, before she could push him away, she was held down by a strong arm and brought to the bedside. Mo Jingshan directly pulled her onto his lap, locking her in his arms by her waist. Earlier on the phone, didn't you say you wanted to take off my clothes? Right now, I'm right in front of you. What's wrong? You can't even raise your head? Jin Wan pushed his arm away. The courage she used to tease him earlier had long disappeared to who knew which country. After pushing for a long time, he did not budge at all. She could not help but pat his arm, turning to speak to him with a hint of anger. Who asked you to come so suddenly? I wasn't mentally prepared at all. He chuckled softly by her ear. Are you sure you don't welcome me? Then I'll leave now, and let you hug your Mr. Bear until daybreak? At the same time, Mo Jingshan's gaze shifted to the large, white bear that was slanted on the bed. His lips curved in a light smile. Chapter 31. Even though he did not move to leave, Jin Wan still subconsciously grabbed his sleeve and pressed down on his arm, preventing him from leaving. Mo Jingshan wrapped his arms around her waist, his handsome face leaning closer. His thin lips were almost pressed against her cheek, and his breath was warm. Could it be that the person who sent me the message earlier wasn't you? Jin Wan did not speak. Being held in his arms, she felt her entire body soften. She was so soft that she did not know what to say. She really did not want to break this warm silence. This made her feel at ease, like a fallen leaf returning to its roots. She did not speak. The man's voice was close by her ear, low and ambiguous. If you don't speak, I'll kiss you in? Jin Wan was about to speak, but the moment she turned her head, she was abruptly kissed by the man who had lowered his head. The sudden kiss caused her entire body to instantly become docile. She obediently stayed in his arms without moving. This kind of sitting position was overly intimate, challenging all of her senses. His kiss deepened, and Jin Wan slowly closed her eyes. Just as she was about to try to respond, she suddenly felt her hand being raised by him. She opened her eyes and felt him pressing her hand against his collar. When he kissed her, his gaze was silently provoking her. It was as though he was saying, "If you have the ability, come and take it off." Under his gaze, Jinwan was so shaken that even her bones were about to turn soft. She pressed her hand against his collar, but did not move for a long time. He held her even more tightly in his arms, and they were inseparable. Their gentle lips and tongues continued to intertwine. Because her breathing was not smooth, she leaned into his embrace. Her hand also unconsciously gripped the collar of his shirt tightly. Her fingertips could feel the heat of his body through his clothes. In her previous life, this kind of ambiguous entanglement, this kind of immersion without any defenses, was unfamiliar yet exciting to her. She had never experienced this kind of trembling. When Jinwan's consciousness was in a daze, his hand reached into her clothes. His warm fingertips caressed her skin. It was as though they carried a prairie fire, burning her inch by inch. Jinwan's body abruptly trembled. She abruptly opened her eyes, only to see that the man's eyes were as deep as the bottom of the sea. During the day, she had been busy with the real estate data and documents. She had been in the housing management office and all kinds of smoke-filled information halls. At this moment, she still felt that she smelled bad. Remembering that she hadn't showered yet, she quickly pushed him again, but he easily pressed her down on the bed. Jinwan panted. Her clean and fair face hid her emotions and blush. "This is the G home, not the U garden. Why don't we wait until we return to the U garden?" From the start, Mo Jingshan did not plan on giving her a chance to retreat. He continued kissing her deeply, not stopping for even a moment. While she was unprepared, he almost took off half of her clothes. Wait. I haven't showered yet." Jinwan's hair was disheveled, and her cheeks were red. She could no longer control the frequency of her breathing. She struggled slightly. "Let me take a shower. I'll be done immediately. I'll definitely be done soon." You. Because of her bashful and timid gaze, Mo Jingshan felt an undercurrent rush down his body. His black eyes seemed to be burning with fire, and he pressed her back into the soft blanket. The man's hoarse voice caused her heart to tighten. "Who is the only one qualified to be on your bed? I'll give you a chance to say it again." The great Mo Corporation CEO was actually bickering with a large, white bear to this extent. Jinwan tilted her head to avoid him. "This bear has been on my bed for so many years. I can't even remember when I bought it. Compared to Mr. Bear, how many nights has Mr. Mo hugged me to sleep?" Mo Jingshan's handsome brows rose. He lowered his head again. "On your bed, for the next few decades, it will only be me." As he spoke, without waiting for Jinwan to react, his kiss landed on her ear. Her most sensitive spot was suddenly kissed by him. Jinwan felt as though her scalp was about to explode. Her mind went blank. Mo Jingshan. In any case, she did not really intend to be a tortoise. It was just that he came too suddenly, and she was not mentally prepared. She really was not prepared. Even now, her heart was still beating wildly. "What did you call me?" It was as though he was purposely not letting go of her most sensitive spot. His low and hoarse voice pressed against her ear, as though he was threatening her. Jinwan pursed her lips. Her eyes were dark and filled with arousal. He even brushed his warm breath against her ear, causing her to tremble in his embrace. She could not even speak. "What did you call me?" His voice was dark and hoarse as he asked in a low voice. "Jingshan." Jinwan could no longer think calmly. She could not even form a complete sentence. She could only subconsciously respond to his forceful question. This answer seemed to be unsatisfactory to him. His hand moved up her clothes. Jinwan's entire body instantly tightened. She looked up at him, as though she had been electrocuted. However, she saw that the man's deep gaze was fixed on all her expressions. Under his gaze, her willpower, which wasn't very strong to begin with, gradually weakened. Even the matter of insisting on taking a shower was almost thrown to the back of her mind. "Hubby," such a soft and velvety voice, to a man, was like a drug that stimulated everything. The scorching kiss moved from her ear to her snow-white neck, and then to her collarbone. Dotted and dotted, he gently kissed her. Bit by bit, still going down. All of a sudden, the tightly shut bedroom door was knocked. Both of their movements paused. Jinwan abruptly wanted to stand up, but was pressed down by Mo Jingshan. He looked at her deeply, appearing completely unaffected as he continued to kiss her. Someone's knocking. You. The door was silent for a few seconds before sounds came again. Knock, knock, knock. Following that, Ji Mengran's soft voice sounded from outside the door. Big sister, are you asleep? I asked Auntie Qin to cook supper earlier, but she made too much. I can't eat so much, so I brought some out for you. Brother Jingshan has been busy all night. You shouldn't have eaten much, right? Open the door. I'll bring the supper in. Jinwan turned to look at the door. She wanted to get up, but Mo Jingshan did not let her go. After struggling for a while, her clothes became even more disheveled. Are you sure you want to open the door like this? Mo Jingshan lowered his head, smiling heavily at her shoulders that already had traces of ambiguity. Jinwan glared at him, lowering her voice. It's true that wherever you go, Ji Mengran will definitely be absent. Usually, I don't see her eat supper. Tonight, she's actually so persistent. Not only does she want to eat, she even insists on bringing it over for you. Mo Jingshan abruptly kissed her lips harshly. What supper? Eating you is enough. Chapter 32. Ji Mengran was right outside the door. Jinwan really could not concentrate. If we don't send Ji Mengran away, she'll stand outside the door for the entire night, she softly protested. Mo Jingshan's hand rubbed her head, standing up to open the door. Ji Mengran was still knocking on the door, but as though she was afraid her father would hear her, she softly said, Are you guys asleep? Big sister, you usually don't sleep so early. Before she could finish speaking, the door in front of her was suddenly opened. The moment she saw it was Mo Jingshan, Ji Mengran's gaze paused on his unbuttoned shirt for 2 seconds. She then raised her eyes. Brother Jingshan, I'll bring the supper in for you. Mo Jingshan's tall figure blocked the door, his voice indifferent. Take it back. We're not eating. Seeing his indifference, Ji Mengran pursed her lips. But Brother Jingshan, you came so late from work. You definitely haven't. There's no need. She had yet to finish speaking when she heard a pung. The door in front of Ji Mengran was slammed shut. Ji Mengran's eyes widened, staring in disbelief at the door that had been mercilessly slammed shut. Jinwan, who had just sat up from the bed with her messy clothes, did not expect the matter to be resolved so quickly. Although this was indeed Mo Jingshan's style, this was the Ji home. He still had to give the Ji family some face. But clearly, he did not plan on giving Ji Mengran any face. Just as she was thinking, she raised her eyes to see Mo Jingshan walking back. The moment Jinwan saw his eyes that were as deep as the sea, she immediately jumped up from the bed. She grabbed the big white bear on the bed and threw it at him, turning to escape to the bathroom. I'm going to take a shower. Mo Jingshan caught the bear she threw. He then glanced at her fleeing back view and sighed with a smile. He threw the eyesore big white bear to the side. Ji Mengran wanted to knock on the door, but the room was too quiet. She raised her hand and put it down. Her fingers that were gripping the bowl were turning white from the force. A moment later, she gritted her teeth and returned to her own room. She threw the supper in her hands into the trash can and threw the bowl away as well. Jinwan lingered in the bathroom for half an hour, before leaving with a towel wrapped around her. Walking out of the bathroom, she held a towel to dry her hair with one hand, and pressed down on the towel wrapped around her chest with the other, subconsciously afraid that it would fall. As she walked, she glanced at the person by the bedside, and saw that he was looking at an old photo album by her bedside. What are you looking at? She wiped her hair, until it was no longer dripping and walked over. Mo Jingshan placed the album down. She lowered her eyes to see the photo of the family of 4 from more than 10 years ago. At that time, Shun Haru had not interfered. At that time, the Ji family was happy and blissful. This is my mother. She glanced at her. Isn't she beautiful? Mo Jingshan's voice was low, but even so, his voice was pleasant and magnetic. From this photo, you don't look much like your sister since you were young. That's right. Although Meng Ran and I are blood-related sisters, we don't look alike at all. Jinwan curved her lips. It's not just that we don't look alike. I don't even look alike to my mother. If it weren't for the fact that Dad has always favored me the most, I would really suspect if I'm really their biological daughter. Mo Jingshan suddenly glanced at her. The moment she met his dark and deep eyes, Jin Wan was affected by the faint hint of a smile on his face. She subconsciously lowered her head to look at the towel on her body. It did not seem like there was anything exposed. That my hair isn't dry yet. I'll go dry it. She turned around. However, before she could take 2 steps, the man easily pulled her back and pushed her onto the bed. Jin Wan reflexively wanted to get up, but Mo Jingshan's hand was already on her waist. His left hand landed on the other side of the bed, trapping her under his body. His voice became increasingly deep and seductive. Did you think I would let you off again and again? Her long hair was slightly damp. It was thick and soft, spreading across the bed like seaweed. Because of his position, her cheeks became redder and redder. Her heart began to beat faster and faster. Jin Wan moved her lips, wanting to speak. Mo Jing. The man did not give her another chance to speak. He lowered his head and kissed her. Jin Wan was just about to reach out to push his chest, when her hands were pressed against the top of her head by him. This position. Jin Wan's face exploded in red. You. Don't pull my towel. It was not easy for her to wrap herself up so tightly in the bathroom earlier. Don't touch there. You don't. Jin Wan's face was so red that it was about to drip blood. She had never experienced this before. Usually, she was used to kissing, hugging, and even purposely teasing her sensitive spots. But to directly pull off her towel on the bed, this was furthermore, his hand was reaching into her towel from below. You didn't bring a change of clothes in, and only came out wrapped in a towel. Wasn't it to make it easier for me to take it off? And his voice was bewitching, causing Jin Wan's little anticipation and shyness to be completely exposed. She admitted that she did not plan to escape tonight. However, this overflowing tide of passion had completely overturned her previous understanding. Right now, her mind was completely blank. Everything was based on her instincts. Jin Wan felt that Mo Jingshan was completely suppressing her. His scorching kiss caused her to be unable to think. When he whispered behind her ear, his breath was so hot that she couldn't help but shiver. Did the courage to threaten to take off my clothes get eaten by a bear? I drove at 200 kilometers per hour from the company to the G home. Yet I still have to take it off myself? She had already said that no matter how close his company was to the G home, it was impossible for him to reach the G home so quickly. In the end, he actually drove at 200 kilometers per hour. The scorching tide of passion continued to engulf her. Jin Wan was teased until she was about to cry. Don't touch there. Don't kiss. Her voice was delicate and soft to the point where she did not dare to believe that this tone came from her own mouth. She did not expect that this would cause the man, who was already tensed up, to lose control. He lowered his head and fiercely kissed her lips again. Jin Wan was pressed down by him. Her lips and tongue were occupied by him. The towel on her body had long been thrown off the bed. She had never been so aroused before. Her body had never trembled from anxiety and anticipation like this. She was already naked, but the man on top of her was still fully dressed. Her hand was suddenly held by him. From the few buttons of his shirt, he held it and unbuttoned it one by one. He then held her hand and slid it down to his belt. Her hand pressed against the expensive and exquisite metal front of the belt. The cold and hard touch caused Jin Wan's mind to go blank for several seconds. She only heard him coaxing softly, "Be good. Undo it." Chapter 33. Anyway, his shirt had already been unbuttoned. As for the belt, she would remove it as well. Since they had already reached this step, Jin Wan gathered her courage and tried to undo it under his control. Perhaps it was because she had never done it before. After a long time, she did not succeed. She raised her head to look at him in defeat. "I can't undo it." Mo Jingshan chuckled softly, holding her hand and placing it on a protrusion by the side of the metal buckle. His fingers pressed lightly, and a soft and pleasant sound could be heard. Hearing his low and husky chuckle as he leaned down to kiss her ear, she gripped the shirt he had yet to take off with both hands. Her voice was soft and hoarse. "Mo Jingshan, gentler. Firstly, she was afraid it would hurt like the first time. Secondly, this was the Ji home. She was afraid that if she made a sound, it would be heard. Mo Jingshan lowered his head, seeing her eyes that were about to overflow with tears. He kissed her lips. Are you sure that you only felt pain that night? Jin Wan. That night when he was drugged, she had experienced it twice in both her previous and current lives. At the beginning, she was in so much pain that she wanted to die. She cried and begged him to let her go. But later on, she did not know when it started, but her crying voice gradually changed. It no longer sounded like her. But at that time she was still in a daze. She did not even know that she had been reborn. How could she remember it so clearly? Did he have to make her remember? The man above her narrowed his eyes. Do you remember? Jin Wan was completely unable to recall how she had changed that night. She turned her head and buried her face in the blankets, not wanting to answer his question. But the more she did not want to answer, the more he did not give up. Every kiss targeted her sensitive spots. Every place his palms touched was like a prairie fire, burning her into ashes. I don't know. You don't know? It's been so many days. I don't remember. You have to remember. Don't. This man. He drew out the desire she had buried deep in her heart, yet he did not satisfy her. He hung on to her, provoked her, kissed her, and teased her. He was clearly like an arrow on the bow, yet he refused to give it to her. Mo Jingshan, you remember? I don't kiss here, speak. I really don't remember. Mo Jingshan was not usually like this. Where was his aloofness? What about his abstinence? Why did he change after she recovered from her illness? He was as much of a jerk as he could get. She turned her head and buried her head in his neck. She said in a wrong tone. You're too much, he chuckled. Am I too much? Yes. You've gone too far. We've been married for half a year, and I've let you go time and time again. Am I being too much? Jin Wan buried her head in his neck and did not speak. Seeing that she had suddenly become obedient, Mo Jingshan was most likely very satisfied. His breathing was no longer as steady because of her breathing against his neck. It gradually became heavy and disorderly, but his voice was still languid and seductive. Be good, don't close your legs so tightly. Spread them apart. Right now, Jin Wan didn't have the ability to think at all. She subconsciously moved her legs and did as she was told. Her obedient attitude would make any man feel hot when he saw it. Miss Meng Ran? Why aren't you asleep yet? Suddenly, there was the sound of a servant passing by outside the door, as well as the question in a low voice. Jin Wan did not dare to believe that Ji Meng Ran had actually returned and was eavesdropping outside the door. Ji Meng Ran, who was hiding outside the door, no longer hid. She paced back and forth by the door. I can't sleep. I ate too much earlier and want to walk around to digest before going to sleep. The servant nodded and was about to leave with the things in her hands. However, Ji Meng Ran's sharp eyes caught the things in the servant's hands. She immediately raised her voice and shouted, Why are you holding this thing? This is something that Brother Sheng gave to my sister. Why is it here? Quickly take it away and destroy it. Don't let Brother Jingshan see it. The servant's entire body stiffened. She softly said, Madam asked me to take this away. I was just about to put it away. I quickly hide it. If others find out about what happened between my sister and Brother Sheng, it would be bad. How was Ji Meng Ran's voice telling the servant to hide it? She raised her voice and spoke loudly, as though she wanted everyone inside to hear every single word. When Jin Wan heard the words Brother Sheng, her back instantly turned cold. A certain memory that she had purposely tried to forget caused all the blood in her body to freeze. Brother Sheng has already been chased out for so many years. Back when my sister got married, not many people knew about what happened between her and Brother Sheng. Quickly take this away. Quickly. Ji Meng Ran's voice came one after another, causing the servant to be slightly stunned. What was wrong with second miss? This was outside eldest miss and Mr. Mo's room. She was speaking so loudly. Wasn't she afraid of waking them up? And that matter. The Ji family had not mentioned it for so many years. Second miss was really strange. Jin Wan abruptly stood up. She grabbed the towel and wrapped it around her body, rushing off the bed. In the end, her entire body was weak from being teased. and her legs were soft and powerless. The moment her feet touched the ground, she suddenly fell forward due to the speed at which she got off the bed. Mo Jingshan's eyes and hands were quick to catch her, but he was too late. Jin Wan's knee knocked heavily against the edge of the bedside table. The pain caused her to cry out softly, "Ah!" Ji Meng Ran, who was outside the door, heard Jin Wan's suppressed movements. Her thoughts immediately went astray as she turned to stare at the tightly shut door. She was sure that they had heard what she had just said outside, and they had heard it very clearly. Even like this, Mo Jingshan did not suspect that something had happened between Jin Wan and someone else, and they could still carry on like this. Could it be that other than that night, they had slept together recently? "Second miss, let's go. Hurry and rest. It's already late." The servant heard the sound and also had her thoughts go astray. She held the things in her hands with a red face and rushed off. Ji Meng Ran's expression was ugly as she stood outside the door. She took a deep breath and turned to leave, afraid that she would hear any more intimate sounds. The moment Jin Wan cried out in pain, Mo Jingshan bent down to carry her up, placing her on his lap. Seeing her reddened eyes, his handsome brows furrowed. "What's wrong with you?" As he spoke, his palm had already touched her knee. Seeing that her skin was only slightly red and not very serious, he finally relaxed. After the pain, Jin Wan finally calmed down. She knew that Ji Meng Ran was trying to drive a wedge between them, although this method was useless and would only make Jin Wan feel disgusted. "It's nothing." Jin Wan lowered her head and touched her knee. She did not explain. Mo Jingshan looked at her, his gaze carrying a hint of sternness. Chapter 34. She sat in his embrace, her hand gripping his slightly open shirt. The moment her gaze landed on his chest that was still very warm, she tilted her head against his shoulder and used her hand to poke at his collar. Meng Ran said earlier. Before he could finish his sentence, the hand that was wantonly moving around his collar was caught by him and pressed down. Mo Jingshan rubbed her slightly damp head. "Marriage is based on trust. I won't ask and you don't have to explain." Jin Wan's heart trembled. She suddenly felt that everything was worth it. Jin Wan's hair had yet to dry. Mo Jingshan's fingers moved through her hair and finally sighed softly. "Where's the hairdryer? Dry your hair." Was he finally going to let her blow dry her hair? Jin Wan blinked at him and pointed toward the white glass cabinet by the bathroom. "It's over there." Mo Jingshan placed her down and covered her naked body with the blanket. He then got up to help her get it. Jin Wan grabbed the towel by the bed and shrunk under the blanket. She barely managed to wrap the towel around herself and rushed off the bed. She did not plan on letting him dry her hair again. If he continued to spoil her like this, she was afraid that in the future, she would not be able to take care of herself. "I'll do it myself." The moment she ran to his side, she reached out to snatch the hairdryer. Mo Jingshan was tall and had long legs. He lowered his eyes to glance at her and raised his hand. Jin Wan could only stand on her tiptoes and try her best to reach up. After stretching for a long time, she still could not grab it. She glared at him. "Give it to me, ah." She jumped up as she spoke. After jumping twice, she noticed the meaningful smile in the man's eyes. Jin Wan subconsciously rushed to press down the towel that almost fell from her chest. "Mo Jingshan, when you're not being serious, you're really too annoying." She could not help but mutter under his slightly amused gaze. She rolled her eyes at him and turned to leave. Her waist was abruptly pulled back by him. He then pressed her down on the single-seater sofa by the bathroom. "I'm only being serious to you, and you're feeling wronged?" Jin Wan harumphed but did not move. Who asked him to be so tall? In front of him, her 165 centimeters tall figure was completely dwarfed. He was clearly using his height to bully her. The sound of the hairdryer rang in her ears. His actions were natural and considerate as he helped her dry her hair. Not only did the appearance of a grown man holding a hairdryer not feel out of place, but it was also so beautiful and elegant that it made people wonder where this man was an elegant god that had descended from. The creator was really amazing. He could put all the perfection on one person. "If you continue to spoil me like this, you'll turn me from a little wild dog on the grassland into a spoiled little Pekingese." Jin Wan closed her eyes and snorted angrily, but she appeared a little innocent. Don't move. The man's voice was low and soft. Jinwan gently. Jinwan tilted her head and glanced at him, but he pushed her head back. Sit properly. Don't move. She raised her eyebrows, listened to the sound of the wind, and casually asked, Do you have no intention of going back to inherit the Mo family's company? I heard that the Shine Group's headquarters has been moved to America. He did not pause. It was as though he would casually reply to her question. His tone was normal. Shine Group still has grandfather and the Mo family's elders and uncles. She raised her hand to play with a strand of hair hanging in front of her chest. But I remember that grandfather Mo doesn't seem to have any intentions of leaving the company to them. Instead, he wants you to go back. Mo Jingshan did not speak, but turned off the hairdryer. He rubbed her hair gently. One Mo corporation is enough to support you. Support her? Supporting her was actually very costly, although she was very restrained now, and did not buy various luxuries to fill her boring life like before. Furthermore, in this lifetime, she did not intend to be supported by anyone. Mo Jingshan had already placed the hairdryer back. Jinwan stood up and used her fingers to comb her hair. She glanced back to see that his shirt was still half unbuttoned. Earlier on, she did not notice that the great CEO Mo had actually helped her dry her hair in such a disheveled manner. But even though his clothes were disheveled, this appearance of his made him appear lazy and seductive, causing one to be unable to shift their gaze away. There was not the slightest hint of a hooligan's aura. Instead, it was so good-looking that it made one's hair stand up. In the past, she rarely had the opportunity to speak so much with Mo Jingshan. It could be said that before they got married, she did not understand him well enough. Aside from his family background, his appearance, the fact that he did not have any women before marriage, and the fact that he doted on her after marriage, she actually knew nothing about him. Aunt's words last time weren't wrong. There are so many women who like you, and there are many rich and famous young ladies who are worthy of you. What exactly do you see in me? Jinwan supported herself with one hand on the sofa, watching as he slowly rolled up his sleeves. And even a casual movement was so good-looking. Mo Jingshan raised his eyes to look at her. His lips curved slightly. Come here. What for? Although she asked this, she still stood up and walked over. The two of them were only separated by a small sofa. It was only 2 steps. She had just approached him and met his dark and calm eyes when the man suddenly reached out and pulled her into his embrace. He lowered his head and kissed her. The light in the bedroom was so bright that she could not open her eyes. She leaned against his embrace and was kissed by him for a long time. Thinking back to what they had almost done on the bed earlier, she did not even know where to place her hands. After the kiss ended, Mo Jingshan's eyes darkened as he watched her. I'm going to shower. Let's shower together, in? The bathroom in my room is so small. It's not as big as the one in the U garden. 2 people won't be able to shower. Besides, I just showered. Mo Jingshan did not give her any chance to refuse. He opened the bathroom door and brought her in. Mo Jingshan, the soundproofing in my bathroom isn't very good, don't. In the next second, she was abruptly lifted up. Jinwan softly cried out, but hurriedly suppressed the sound that was about to escape her lips. Her entire body was carried onto the marble counter in the bathroom. Her messy hair contrasted against her snow-white skin. She placed her hands on his shoulders and did not dare to let go, afraid that she would fall. Her expression was one of shock. What are you doing? Testing the soundproofing. He pushed her against the wall behind the marble counter. Her back was pressed against the wall. Jinwan watched him. She took a deep breath. Put me down. Before she could finish her words, the man held the back of her head with one hand, forcing her to lower her head and press his lips against hers. He sucked on her lips, the tip of his tongue tracing the shape of her lips. He kissed her until her entire body was soft and soft. He pried open her teeth, forcefully entering her mouth and attacking her territory. The man's breath landed on her neck. His low and heavy voice declared, Don't even think about sleeping tonight. Chapter 35. The next day, the sky had just brightened when Jinwan was woken up by a knock on the door. She furrowed her brows and tried to turn around, But she could not. Her entire body was held in Mo Jingshan's embrace. Thinking back to last night, not only was there no shyness on her face, but she was so angry that she wanted to pinch him a few times. He said that she wouldn't be able to sleep tonight, and she really didn't sleep at all. Mo Jingshan, this man was too vengeful. Just because of Ji Mengran's words last night, when the two of them were being intimate, she had suddenly pushed him away. He bore a grudge against her. After that, he brought her into the bathroom and kissed her until she was limp. Then, he touched her until she was unable to extricate herself. She was so aroused by him that she almost begged him to fulfill her wish. In the end, he acted as if nothing had happened. He washed her up, carried her out, threw her onto the bed, and hugged her to sleep. He did nothing else. It caused her body to heat up for a long time, and being hugged by him made the heat even more unbearable. No matter how she struggled in his arms, he ignored her and didn't allow her to move. His whole body was on fire, and he had nowhere to put it out. This was worse than being drugged. Jinwan's face was filled with anger. Because of the urgent knocking on the door, she could not stay still in his arms. She tried to sit up, but was pressed back down by him. The man did not open his eyes. His handsome face was drowsy and lazy. When she was about to get up angrily, he hugged her and said hoarsely, "It's only 5:30. Would a normal person knock on the door at this time?" Jinwan knew it. Who was it that came to disturb her sleep so early in the morning? Thinking about it this way, he could guess who it was. What a lingering ghost. So Ji Mengran didn't sleep at all last night. Jinwan's mind became slightly clearer. She curled up in his embrace, but because of the torment from last night, she bit down on his chest. Mo Jingshan grunted. He furrowed his brows and tightened his grip on her. "Behave yourself. Don't move." His voice was even more hoarse. She didn't believe that he didn't feel the slightest bit of discomfort when she had been so miserable last night. If they were not in the Ji home, she would have pressed him down on the bed and raped him. The door was knocked even louder. Ji Mengran called out from outside, "Sister, wake up. The sun is especially bright today. Let's go for a morning jog." Ji Mengran had never been so diligent before, and had never taken the initiative to go for a morning jog. She couldn't sleep, so why didn't she consider if others were sleepy? Jinwan abruptly sat up. Her movement was too sudden, and Mo Jingshan was caught off guard. He opened his eyes. His voice was calm and low. "Looks like it's better if you don't come back to the Ji family in the future." Jinwan glanced at the door. Even if she did not have a temper when she woke up, she was so annoyed by Ji Mengran that she wished she could smash the door on her face. "Sister, are you awake?" Mengran's probing voice sounded from outside the door again. Jinwan decided to lie on the bed and pretend she did not hear anything. She refused to believe that Ji Mengran's skin would be so thick that she would ignore the feelings of the rest of the family and continue knocking. As expected, the door was knocked again. Ji Mengran could not hear anything. Even if she guessed that she had been ignored, she could not continue knocking because her father and Auntie Shun had been woken up. "What are you doing? It's so early in the morning. Don't you know that everyone is resting?" Ji Hongwen furrowed his brows. He walked down from the bedroom on the 3rd floor. The moment he saw Ji Mengran, his expression turned cold. Ji Mengran rushed to take a step back, cautiously whispering, "Dad, didn't my sister just catch a cold a few days ago? I want to go for a morning jog with her to train. Why don't I see you waking up so early? Don't you know that your brother-in-law slept here last night? What's with the ruckus?" Ji Hongwen scolded. At this moment he was no longer sleepy. He warned her again, and directly turned to go downstairs. The room finally regained its silence. Jinwan was extremely sleepy, and gradually relaxed. She rubbed her head against Mo Jingshan's chest, and found a comfortable position to continue sleeping. At around 7 o'clock, Jinwan walked down the stairs feeling refreshed. Seeing the people downstairs, she smiled and turned back to call out, "Jing Shun, I forgot to bring my phone. Help me get it." Ji Mengran was sitting by the dining table. She was just about to find a few words to scold Jinwan for waking up so late when she heard her words. Not only did she not see Mo Jingshan's figure, but after Jinwan said those words, she heard his steady footsteps return from the staircase. It was clear that he was going to retrieve Jinwan's phone. This Jinwan, she actually dared to order Mo Jingshan around. Who did she think she was? In less than a minute, Mo Jingshan returned downstairs. Jinwan was still waiting on the stairs. She received the phone from him and blinked at him. Thank you, hubby. Mo Jingshan's clear, black eyes met her gaze. He calmly curved his lips. Go eat breakfast. Dad is already waiting. Ji Hongwen watched as the two of them walked down one after another. One was fresh, beautiful, and generous, while the other was cold and handsome, causing one to be unable to shift their eyes away. Ji Hongwen did not seem to mind that they had woken up late. Instead, he smiled and had Auntie Qin bring over the prepared breakfast. Dad, good morning. Jinwan walked to the seat closest to Ji Hongwen energetically. Shenheru saw that she had gone to that seat, and her gaze was slightly unhappy. She was just about to open her mouth to mock her when she saw Mo Jingshan also walking over. Due to his aura and status, she thought for a moment and decided not to speak. All right. How was your sleep? Ji Hongwen glanced at Jinwan in a good mood, before turning to Mo Jingshan. This is the first time you've returned to the Ji home after getting married. If there's anything you're not used to, you must tell me. Mo Jingshan nodded at him calmly and politely. It's not bad. The soundproofing in the bedroom is very good. I couldn't hear anything, and had a good night's sleep. Soundproofing? Jinwan glanced at him. This man was really black-bellied. Last night, he had already bullied her to such an extent. These words were clearly meant to mock her. She glared at him darkly. Mo Jingshan only chuckled softly. Ji Mengran sat opposite the two of them, raising her eyes to look at Mo Jingshan. Because in the Ji family, Mo Jingshan's brows were not as cold and indifferent as they usually were. Although he was still somewhat indifferent, he had given Jinwan enough face, and was no longer as cold and distant as he used to be. His body carried the freshness of the morning. It was really good looking. However, his hands were attentively pulling out the chair for Jinwan. He did not even glance at the people around them. Chapter 36. During breakfast, because Mo Jingshan was present, Ji Hongwen suddenly brought up the topic of Elder Mo's 80th birthday in a week. Nwan, has it been a long time since you bought any new clothes? Ji Hongwen suddenly asked. Jinwan was drinking her soup when she raised her head in surprise. Weren't we talking about Grandfather Mo's birthday? Why did the topic suddenly shift to me? You've been used to being casual for so many years. Usually, you can dress however you want. But for Elder Mo's birthday, you have to dress more formally. Jinwan wanted to say that it was not like she had no clothes to wear. Regardless of whether it was the Ji family or the Mo family's wardrobe, she had whatever she wanted. How formal did she have to be? Jingshan, if you're not busy today, why don't you accompany Nwan to choose a few sets of clothes? Ji Hongwen did not wait for her to speak, turning to look at Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan calmly smiled. All right. Dad, I don't lack clothes. Let Jingshan accompany you. Just obediently go and buy some for me. Ji Hongwen once again displayed his authority as the head of the family. He glared at her, as though saying how immature she was. After being married for so long, you've never officially returned to the Mo family. What are the rumors out there? Don't you have any idea in your heart? Ji Hongwen harshly said. Jingshan usually spoils you, but that doesn't mean you can always be so willful and impolite. The Mo family is not an ordinary family. How many people will be watching you during Elder Mo's birthday? You still have to act the way you should. Jinwan did not retort. Buying clothes was not important. Shopping with Mo Jingshan was a fresh experience. At the same time, she could also think about what kind of birthday present to give Grandfather Mo. Since Mo Jingshan did not reject it, she naturally accepted it. Dad, our Ji family will also be going to Elder Mo's birthday, right? Ji Mengran suddenly asked. Of course. As in-laws, how could we not go to Elder Mo's birthday? But Dad, I haven't bought any new clothes in a long time. Ji Mengran's tone carried a hint of grievance. Can I follow big sister and brother Jingshan to buy clothes? Don't you spend money recklessly every day? What clothes do you need? Ji Hongwen sternly shouted at her. Don't mess around. The clothes I usually buy are for everyday wear. I don't have any clothes that are suitable for that kind of occasion. Anyway, my sister and the others are going shopping today, not going on a date. It won't hurt if they bring me along. You. Ji Hongwen was just about to reprimand him. Since Meng Gran is going to attend the birthday banquet, it's not wrong to let her choose a few sets of clothes. Shenheru chimed in from the side. These two are your biological daughters. You can't be too biased, right? That's right. Dad, you're biased. Ji Menggran reached out and hugged Shenheru's arm, acting coquettishly. You don't even love me as much as Auntie Shun. Since Menggran wants to go, let's go together. Jin Wan smiled indifferently. Sis, you're the best. Ji Menggran winked at her. Jin Wan lightly curved her lips. If she wants to follow, then let her follow. When the time comes, it's fine as long as she doesn't regret it. Wan, you've really spoiled Menggran too much. Since young, you've always given in to her. Ji Hongwen saw that Jin Wan did not object, and did not continue scolding her. Jin Wan's lips curved into a cold smile. After all, she's my dearest little sister. If I don't give in to her, who else can I give in to? After spoiling her for so many years, and giving in to her biological sister for so many years, she still wanted to snatch her sister's husband away. Many years later, she would even single-handedly push her sister into the abyss of life, causing her to die tragically. Ji Menggran did not notice Jin Wan's unfathomable smile. She only focused on Mo Jingshen's direction. Brother Jingshen, in a while I'll quietly follow you and sister. I definitely won't disturb you. After sister is done shopping, I'll choose what I want to buy, alright? Mo Jingshen's cold brows moved slightly. His gaze lightly landed on her. But he did not reply. The smile in Ji Menggran's eyes froze. He was really too stingy to even say a single word to her. Shenheru tugged on Ji Menggran's hand. Isn't it just going to buy clothes? Menggran, there's no need for you to make yourself feel so wronged. It's rare that you can go out with your sister and brother-in-law. Remember to buy the most expensive and best. Anyway, your brother-in-law's money can't even be used up in several lifetimes. Isn't that right, Wan? As Shenheru spoke, she glanced toward Jin Wan. She was purposely making things difficult for Jin Wan. However, Jin Wan did not speak and only smiled. Her expression was as calm as Mo Jingshen, who was sitting beside her. Seeing that she was not the least bit angry, Shenheru raised her brows. She did not say anything more. In any case, no matter what was said, Jin Wan would not suddenly stand up and throw a tantrum. She would also not make Ji Hongwen unhappy. Right now, Jin Wan knew when to advance and when to retreat. Who knew what she was planning in her heart? Jin Wan appeared as though she did not care about the thoughts of everyone at the table. Not long after, she placed down her bowl and chopsticks. Hubby, shall we set off now? Are you full? Mo Jingshen asked. And you've put a lot into my bowl. If I eat any more, my stomach will burst. Mo Jingshen smiled mildly. He said to Ji Hongwen, we'll be leaving first. Enjoy your meal. Ji Hongwen nodded. Seeing his daughter and son-in-law being so loving, he truly felt comfortable from the bottom of his heart. Seeing that the two of them had already stood up, Ji Menggran was shocked. We're leaving now. I haven't finished eating. Who asked you to speak so much earlier? Eating so slowly. Ji Hongwen turned to glare at her. If you want to go, hurry up and follow us. Don't let Jing Shun and your sister wait for so long. Otherwise, don't follow us. Ji Menggran felt slightly wronged, but did not speak further. She stood up and wiped her mouth. Seeing that Jin Wan and Mo Jingshen had already left the villa, she hurriedly ran out. In the end, the moment she stepped out, she saw Jin Wan actually taking the initiative to hold on to Mo Jingshen's arm. Ji Menggran paused for a moment before quickly walking forward. She smiled and said, Brother Jingshen, didn't you park your car in the villa's front yard? Why did you directly walk out of the main door? Jin Wan turned back. It's what I said earlier. Today is the weekend, and the traffic will definitely be bad. Driving will take up too much time, so I suggested that your brother-in-law not drive today. Not driving? Ji Menggran was shocked. Then how are we going to go? Of course we'll take a taxi. Jin Wan's tone was mild. She held on to Mo Jingshen's arm, and raised her eyes to look at him. Why don't we just take the public bus? Let's just treat it as accompanying the great CEO Mo. to observe the customs of the people. How about it? Mo Jingshan's tone was mild. Up to you. Public bus. Ji Minggran suddenly regretted following them out. She had never taken a public bus in her entire life. Going out with someone like Mo Jingshan, whose net worth could not be easily estimated, yet they actually had to take a 1 or 2 yuan public bus. Was there something wrong with Jinwan's brain? Ji Minggran bit her lips in anger. She walked up to suggest a different method of travel, but the two of them had already walked far away. Chapter 37. Jinwan and Mo Jingshan walked out of the villa. They completely ignored Ji Minggran, who was behind them, and followed behind her. It was fine if they wanted to go shopping together, but Ji Minggran should not even think about sitting in Mo Jingshan's car. Not only could she not let Ji Minggran sit in the front passenger seat, she could not even sit in the back. She definitely could not let Mo Jingshan's car have the slightest bit of Ji Minggran's smell. When they arrived at the bus stop, Ji Minggran looked at the crowd waiting nearby. They were dressed in expensive clothes, carrying cheap bags that cost 1 to 2,000 yuan, and were wearing unpleasant and tasteless perfume. She immediately hid to the side with a look of disgust. Big sister, should we take a taxi? There are so many people on the bus, and there are so many people lining up here. It's really too crowded. Ji Minggran approached Jinwan's side and made a final struggle. Anyway, there aren't many stops. It won't be a big deal if we squeeze a little. Jinwan did not even turn back or look at her. I heard that there are many thieves on the bus, and the smell on these people is also very. She had yet to finish speaking when the bus they planned to take suddenly stopped in front of them. A group of people lined up in an orderly manner. Only 2 or 3 people squeezed up. Mo Jingshan raised his hand to protect Jinwan as they lined up at the back. The two of them did not even listen to Ji Minggran's words. She saw that Mo Jingshan did not show the slightest bit of disdain. It was likely that he had never taken a bus in his entire life, but he actually lowered himself to line up with Jinwan. Thinking back to the incident where he personally bought Jinwan glutinous rice balls, Ji Minggran was so angry that she wanted to vomit blood. Seeing that they had already boarded the bus, she had no choice but to follow up. There were not many people on this bus. At the very least, there were a few seats. However, only 2 of the seats were next to each other. The others were all by themselves, and they were all in the back row. Jinwan naturally sat with Mo Jingshan in the 2 seats in the front row. The moment Ji Minggran approached, she discovered that there was no seat for her. There are seats in the last few rows, Jinwan reminded. Ji Minggran had no choice but to go to the back of the bus. However, she didn't expect that there were a few old people who often came out for a walk in the last few rows of the bus. 2 of them were coughing non-stop. The air here was indescribably dirty compared to the front. She stood there for a long time with a look of disgust, considering whether she should sit down or not. Suddenly, a car in front of the bus came to a screeching halt. Ji Minggran couldn't stand still and could only sit down angrily. When the old man saw this young lady, he smiled kindly at her. However, when he saw the disgust and indescribable expression on her face, the expressions of the old men around him immediately turned cold. As for Jinwan, it was true that she had never taken a bus before. However, in the last few years of her previous life, she was so poor that she could barely afford to take a bus. After saving for so long, the cheap mode of transportation became a habit. She turned to look at Mo Jingshan. Not only did he not complain that there were too many people here, but he also did not seem uncomfortable at all. Even though he was sitting on the bus, his aura was still the same, noble and calm. The sunlight outside the window shone in. This man was really good looking. Taking the bus, are you used to it? Jinwan leaned close to his ear to ask softly. The man chuckled softly, his tone calm and indifferent. Do you think I've never taken one before? You've actually taken a bus before? Jinwan did not dare to believe it. She would never have imagined that as the heir of the Mo family, the great CEO Mo who was born with a high status, he would actually have such a down-to-earth experience. Mo Jingshan's thin lips calmly spat out 2 words. When I was studying abroad, I lived alone for 2 years. The meaning behind his words was that he had once lived an independent life without his family following him, without any helpers or aunties to take care of him. That kind of life was so free that he could take the bus whenever he wanted and do whatever he wanted to do. There were no rules to restrict him, and he did not need to guard his noble status to stand at a high place. He could even be down to earth without any disgust. She really wanted to know how different the Mo Jingxian of that time was from the current him. Jinwan leaned close to his ear to whisper, "What should I do? We've already been married for so long, but I actually only know a little about you. Will you despise me?" The man's eyes were filled with a deep smile. He turned his head and lowered his eyes to look at her as she leaned closer. With just a turn of their heads, the distance between them was so close that they could feel each other's breathing. The bus was filled with people. Jinwan was startled for a moment and subconsciously moved back. However, her hand was suddenly held by him, not allowing her to move away. Mo Jingxian's voice was soft and indifferent. Only she could hear it. "Mrs. Mo, there's still a lot of time. We can get to know each other better every day." Get to know each other better? Jinwan's face heated up. She rushed to pull her hand out of his grasp. The man did not let go. Just like that, Jinwan's face was red as he held her hand. On the bus, they watched the passers-by going up and down. Sitting at the back, Jimen had to endure the coughs and unpleasant smells of the people around her. She also had to raise her eyes to watch the two people in the front row, who were intimately connected. After much difficulty, they could alight from the bus. Jimen was the first to rush down. She hurriedly patted her clothes, afraid that the various smells on the bus would linger on her. She turned to see Mo Jingxian and Jinwan alight from the bus. She pretended to be calm as she casually said, "Big sister, earlier on, you should be more mindful of your image on the bus. I was sitting so far away from you, but I saw the two of you kissing each other. It's not good for others to see." Jinwan coldly glanced at her. "We're husband and wife. It's not like we're having an affair. Are you afraid of others seeing us whispering in the bus? What I mean is, Brother Jingxian is the CEO of Mo Corporation. What if he bumped into an employee from his company and saw the usually high and mighty big boss actually taking the bus and being so intimate with a woman on the bus? It wouldn't be good if they spoke carelessly in the company." Ji Mengran's gaze landed on Jinwan's hand. Before she could finish speaking, Jinwan had already wrapped her arms around Mo Jingxian's. Did she think they were conjoined twins? Couldn't they be separated for even a moment? Right now, Jinwan was so lovey-dovey. It was really irritating. "What do you mean by being so intimate with a woman? I'm Mo Jingxian's official wife." "But," Jinwan calmly interrupted her. "Besides, the employees of Mo Corporation aren't bad. They aren't stupid. If they really saw us, they would be curious and go online to check my photo to see if I'm Mrs. Mo or some other woman. Before confirming it, they wouldn't be so stupid as to run to the company to speak carelessly. Do you think anyone dares to spread gossip about Mo Jingxian?" Chapter 38. The place where she got off was a distance from the downtown street. This time, Jinwan didn't plan to take the bus or call a taxi. She decided to walk there. Although it was only a 10-minute walk, Jimen was still furious. Mo Jingxian had never objected to Jinwan's decisions. There was a car available, but she refused to drive or take a taxi. Instead, she insisted on taking the tiring bus. Now she even had to walk. Was Jinwan's brain damaged? Jimen followed behind with an unhappy expression. She raised her eyes to see that Jinwan was leaning her head against Mo Jingxian's shoulder as they walked. It was unknown what they were talking about intimately. Damn it, Jinwan wasn't planning to keep showing off her love today, was she? If she had known this would happen, she wouldn't have followed him out. She originally wanted to find a chance to speak with him alone, but until now, she didn't have the chance. Not only would he not have a chance, but he would also be blinded by their public display of affection. On the bustling commercial street in the center of Sea City, shopping was, after all, a woman's hobby. Mo Jingxian rarely visited such places. Every time he passed by, he would only take a quick glance in the car. Jinwan took his hand and pointed at the stores one by one. She used to frequent all kinds of luxury stores, but now she just passed by and did not intend to go in. After walking for about half an hour, Ji Mengran followed behind in her high heels. She was so tired that her feet almost didn't belong to her. Sister, what kind of clothes do you want to buy? Are you going to wear a gown or something for Elder Mo's birthday? Hurry up and choose a set. Jinwan appeared as though she did not hear anything, and continued to hold Mo Jingshan's arm as they walked forward. As they walked, she asked Mo Jingshan, "What is grandfather Mo like? For his 80th birthday, I don't think the most important thing is how I dress, but what to give him to make him happy. Immediately give him a great-grandson. He'll probably be so happy that he'll live for another 20 years. Mo Jingshan's low voice rang by her ears. Jinwan glared at him. "I'm not joking with you. I really plan on buying grandfather Mo a birthday present first." Mo Jingshan watched her glistening eyes and chuckled softly. "I'm not joking." Jinwan did not reply, but her heart was beating wildly for a long time. Just as they were talking about gifts, Mo Jingshan actually brought up the topic of her great-grandson. As Jinwan continued to walk, she subconsciously stole a glance at her belly. Although she didn't say it out loud, she was already thinking about it in her heart. She did not know if their first child would be a boy or a girl. A boy would definitely look like him, tall and handsome to the point of charming all kinds of young ladies. If it was a girl, she would have to look half like her and half like him. This was because Mo Jingshan's facial features were all perfect. No matter how you looked at them, they were all good-looking. As she thought about it, Jinwan's gaze drifted past a baby products store. Drifted past. In her previous life, she had never dared to dream of giving birth to Mo Jingshan's child. At that time, she did not even have the chance to see him again, much less have a child. "Sister, there's a high-end clothing customization center up ahead. My best friend often goes there to order gowns. Let's go take a look." Ji Mengran suddenly walked over from behind, blocking Jinwan's gaze that was drifting toward the baby products store. She raised her voice to speak. Jinwan glanced at the shop Ji Mengran mentioned. "It's your 80th birthday, not a banquet. Why would you wear a gown? But didn't Dad say that? There will definitely be a lot of people that day. You can't possibly wear your usual clothes, can you?" Ji Mengran pursed her lips. "There's no need to be so high-profile. Just buy something comfortable and elegant. Sister, you used to love wearing gowns. In the past, you would order one every week." That was in the past, not now. Ji Mengran did not manage to gain any good words, and decided to complain. "Brother Jingshan, look at my sister. Right now, she seems to be especially impatient with me. I'm just giving you a kind suggestion." Kind suggestion? She was clearly reminding him. It reminded Mo Jingshan of how arrogant and conceited Jinwan was in the past. In the past, Jinwan would often follow her father to attend various charity banquets or business banquets. Her every movement was filled with the beauty and pride of a wealthy family's young lady. She was known as Haicheng's #1 young lady. Of course, aside from Jinwan's appearance, there was also the variety of beautiful evening gowns she never wore. Every time, it was enough to stun people. In the past, Jinwan was so extravagant and high-profile. Right now, she was so simple and low-key in front of Mo Jingshan, as though she was not the same person in the past. In other words, Jinwan had always been pretending. Ji Mengran was purposely trying to remind Mo Jingshan of the past Jinwan. The Jinwan who was as proud as a peacock. The Jinwan who made a fuss about divorcing him for half a year. This kind of woman was really not worthy of him. That's right. Dressing appropriately and elegantly for a birthday banquet is the most appropriate. It's a birthday celebration, not a beauty pageant. Gowns are indeed not appropriate. Mo Jingshan's tone was neither salty nor light. Mo Jingshan's words had just landed when he stopped in front of a chess hall. Jinwan ignored Ji Mengran, who was angered to the point her face was ashen. She raised her eyes to look at the chess hall, and asked in understanding, "Does grandfather Mo like to play this kind of chess?" Mo Jingshan's voice was low and mild. During the late Tang dynasty, the chess record left behind by the famous Gu Shiyan was purchased by the owner of this hall. Someone once offered a high price of 100 million yuan, but it was not sold. To this day it is still here. A chess record from the late Tang dynasty? Then grandfather Mo will definitely like it. However, from his tone, it was likely that the other party would not easily sell it. If he was not willing to sell it for 100 million yuan, then it was likely that he would not sell it for 200 million yuan. This owner was clearly someone who did not lack money. Furthermore, his hobbies and obsession could not be compared to money. Her eyes shone as she suggested, "Why don't we go in to take a look? If we can meet the owner, we can discuss with him and see how much we can sell it for." Mo Jingshan glanced at her. "You want to gain grandfather's favor that much? Grandfather Mo treats me very well. His 80th birthday is such a special day. I have to give him a gift that he will really like." Jinwan was very sincere. Mo Jingshan looked at her clear eyes and suddenly smiled. Ji Mengran, who was behind him, suddenly leaned over. "Isn't that simple? Doesn't Dad have an ancient jade chessboard from the early Tang dynasty? Bring that over to Elder Mo. Or bring the chessboard here to exchange for a chess record. As long as this owner isn't stupid, he will definitely choose to exchange a chess record from the late Tang dynasty for an early Tang dynasty chessboard." As she spoke, Ji Mengran appeared to want to perform well in front of Mo Jingshan. She took the initiative to pick up her phone to call home. However, Mo Jingshan continued to focus on Jinwan. "You really want to give this?" Jinwan nodded, staring at him anxiously. "But if I use my dad's chessboard to exchange for it, will it work?" Mo Jingshan coldly curved his lips. "There's no need." After speaking, he held her hand and walked into the hall, leaving Ji Mengran, who was still on the phone, behind. Chapter 39. Jinwan completely did not know why Mo Jingshan had brought her in. The owner of this chess hall was clearly very close to him. When he heard that Mo Jingshan had personally come to visit, he actually came out to welcome him. The owner's surname was Su. He was around 70 or 80 years old. His hair and beard were all white, and he wore gold-rimmed glasses. His tone was very ancient. Being in this hall, Jinwan thought that she had accidentally barged into some ancient place. It was extremely ancient, but she could tell that every door and every table was meticulously made. The price would not be cheap. As expected, in the most prosperous city in the country, there were many crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Originally, Jinwan wanted to explain the reason for her visit to this boss Su. In the end, the waiter here invited her to the private room for tea. Mo Jingshan went in alone with boss Su to talk. Even if they were very close, or if this boss Su was an elder that Mo Jingshan was familiar with, she believed that the other party would not easily hand over such a precious item. Even if Mo Jingshan offered a higher price, it would not be so easy. So what exactly did they go inside for? And so secretive. Jinwan drank her tea, dipping it in the spilled tea. She wrote and drew on the table to kill time. "Mrs. Mo, there's a Miss G outside who said she came with you and COMO. We were unable to confirm her identity, so we did not let her in. She said she's your sister." A waiter suddenly came in and asked her respectfully, "Do you want to let her in?" Jinwan did not expect that this hall was not a place that anyone could casually enter. Since she was blocked outside, then stay outside. "I don't know her," she said as she took another sip of tea, as though it had nothing to do with her. The waiter respectfully nodded at her and left. The private room regained its silence. In such an environment, Jinwan really did not dare to act rashly. It was better to let Ji Mengran in to avoid polluting other people's place. After Ji Mengran received her reply, she angrily tried to explain, but was still not allowed to enter. A few minutes later, Ji Mengran's call came in. She was clearly here to question Jinwan. Jinwan switched her phone to silent mode, tossing it to the side and ignoring it. The call came in 4 or 5 times. In the end, he finally gave up, and the screen quietly dimmed. About 2 hours later, Jinwan got up and went to the bathroom. When she came out of the bathroom, she suddenly saw the door of the inner room open. She hurried over to take a look. Mo Jingshan's figure appeared at the same time as boss Su. Seeing that his clothes were neat and tidy, Jinwan finally released a breath. She had waited for too long, so she wasn't sure what had happened. Earlier, she almost suspected that Mo Jingshan had sold himself in order to help her obtain the chess record. She even suspected that this boss Su had some bad hobbies. As expected, She had thought too much. Jinwan secretly chuckled. She walked over and saw that Boss Su was chatting happily with Mo Jingshan. The moment Boss Su saw Jinwan's expression, he immediately smiled teasingly. Look, your wife has been waiting anxiously. Mo Jingshan lightly curved his lips, calm and noble. I've indeed waited for a long time. All right, my heart is aching right now. I really don't want to talk. You two can go wherever you want to go. I have to think of a way to calm down. Boss Su raised his hand and waved at them. Jinwan originally wanted to discuss with Boss Su to see if she could really use the chessboard to exchange for the chess record. In the end, he wanted to leave just like that. She stared at the white-bearded old man in front of her with a dazed expression. Before she could find a chance to speak, she was directly pulled out by Mo Jingshan. What did you talk to him about in there? Is he unwilling to give it to us no matter how much money we spend? Jinwan curiously asked. Mo Jingshan did not speak. His gaze was calm and unruffled. He glanced at Jinwan, the beautiful, confused, curious, anxious, and slightly upset little woman, who was unable to obtain what she wanted. I say it's rare to find out what grandfather Mo likes. Since you've already brought me here, you can't possibly go empty-handed. Jinwan's words suddenly choked. She stared in shock at the chess record that Mo Jingshan suddenly handed to her. She stared at it in shock for a long time before reaching out to receive it. She carefully flipped it open and glanced at him in shock. This, he actually gave it to us? How much did you spend? Mo Jingshan gave an unfathomable smile and walked out without replying. How much exactly did you spend? Ah, this is a gift I wanted to give to grandfather Mo. Not something you gave it to me. So you have to put it on my tab. I can earn it myself. As long as I have some time, I didn't spend a single cent. Mo Jingshan saw her anxious appearance and no longer kept her in suspense. How is that possible? The two of them walked out of the clubhouse. Jinwan politely nodded at the people inside and politely said goodbye. She then held the extremely valuable chess record in her hands and asked, "What exactly happened? Didn't you say that someone spent 100 million yuan and still couldn't buy it? If you didn't spend any money, could it be that Mo Jingshan had agreed to some difficult request? She did not wish for him to be controlled by others or agree to unreasonable conditions because of her. Elder Su is a chess fanatic," Mo Jingshan calmly stated. "I made a bet with him. If I win against him on the chessboard, the chess record will belong to me." Shock. Shock. Apart from shock, there was more shock. Jinwan's mouth fell open for a long time before she asked in disbelief, "You know how to play chess?" Although grandfather isn't as obsessed as Elder Su, he can be considered half an expert. From the age of 3, I was forced onto the chessboard by him to play with him. What do you think? Mo Jingshan's words were unhurried. Jinwan was so shocked that she could barely close her mouth. She pressed against his side and softly asked with uncertainty, "You really didn't spend a single cent?" The man glanced at her, his brows handsome and stern. "Your husband's face isn't even worth 100 million yuan? What an expensive face." Jinwan swallowed her saliva. "It's worth it. Definitely worth it. Happy. Happy. Shouldn't you let me be happy tonight as well?" "Ah." The man's low and seductive voice brushed against her ears. "Tonight it depends on your performance, en?" Jinwan stared at him in a daze. The chess record in her hands instantly felt as though it weighed 1,000 pounds. She recalled that she had waited too long inside, and had even gone to the bathroom. It was in the bathroom that she discovered that. Jinwan licked her lips, tiptoed to his ear, and softly whispered something. Mo Jingshan's expression instantly froze. She cleared her throat. Seeing his expression, she timidly held the chess record in her hands and looked at him. She said pitifully, "Then, should I return it to you first?" As she spoke, she even put on an expression as though she was willing to part with it and hand it over to him for safekeeping. Mo Jingshan was angered to the point of laughing. Chapter 40. The bustling street was bustling with people. Under Mo Jingshan's gaze, Jinwan happily held the chess record in her hands as she walked. She did not turn back to see the man's angered expression. Not far away was Haicheng's largest department store. Jinwan opened her mouth, Actually, I have a lot of suitable clothes at home. There are also many new ones that haven't even had their tags removed. I might as well buy a suitable coat today. As she spoke, she suddenly glanced at the long coat displayed in the display window of a branded store. She was about to walk over. However, her waist was suddenly tightened. Mo Jingshan directly pulled her back. She raised her head in confusion only to hear the man's low and heavy voice by her ears. It's too thin. How about the one beside it? No. It's only early autumn. I don't think it's very thin. Jean Wan's lips trembled, but her gaze had already instinctively searched for thicker coats. Before she could finish looking, Mo Jingshan had already held her hand, leading her into another branded store by the side. A white cashmere coat displayed in the glass window of the store caught Jean Wan's eyes. It was of moderate thickness, and could be worn from autumn to early winter. It was simple and elegant, yet did not lose the sleekness of a branded design. It was a classic and elegant style. Jean Wan raised her eyes in astonishment. She saw that Mo Jingshan seemed to be satisfied with this one. As a man who rarely shopped, Mo Jingshan's taste and foresight were indeed very high. Jean Wan also liked this one. She directly called for a shop assistant to find a suitable size for her to try on. She wore the coat as she turned back and forth in front of the full-length mirror. The two shop assistants by the side had expressions of astonishment and praise. Miss, this one really suits you. Your skin is so white, and your figure is so good. This coat looks even better on you than on a model. It's especially elegant. Jean Wan subconsciously turned to look at Mo Jingshan, who was sitting on the sofa in front of the store. He was sitting there, handsome, noble and clear. His silent, cold, and noble aura could not be ignored. He was noble and extraordinary. From time to time, a few of the shop assistants and shop assistants in the store would secretly glance at the man sitting on the sofa in the lounge. Their eyes were filled with all kinds of admiration and curiosity. There were also some younger girls who couldn't stop their faces from blushing and palpitating. Do you have men's clothing in your store? Jean Wan's gaze shifted to the men's clothing area next to the fitting room. Yes, Mississippi. Would you like to choose clothes for the gentleman who came with you? Jean Wan did not speak and turned to walk over. Previously, she had bought a shirt for Mo Jingshan, but she had not bought a matching tie. Today, he was wearing the one she had bought. In the end, she chose one of them, hid the tie behind her, and walked out with a smile. Are you done? Mo Jingshan put down the magazine he had casually picked up and raised his eyes to look at her. His gaze immediately revealed some satisfaction. It was a fact that Jean Wan looked beautiful no matter what she wore. What he was satisfied with was that this coat was indeed warm enough to prevent her from catching a cold again. Is it nice? Jean Wan tilted her head in front of him and asked, like a shy little girl who had gone shopping with her boyfriend for the first time. Very good. The man was not stingy with his praise. Which woman didn't like to be praised? Jean Wan smiled and her beautiful eyes curved. She then whispered mysteriously, stand up for a moment. Mo Jingshan's brows did not move. He looked at her and cooperatively stood up. Jean Wan raised her eyes to look at the man in front of her, who was much taller than her. She took out the tie she had hidden and quickly put it on his neck. When Mo Jingshan slightly raised his eyebrows in understanding, she skillfully fastened the tie on his collar, and then looked at the incomparably handsome man in front of her. Not to mention the surrounding shop staff who were infatuated, even Jean Wan's heart was slightly swayed. No matter in terms of charisma or any other aspect, Mo Jingshan was impeccable. In this life, what she wanted to do was to cherish everything she had and take back everything that belonged to her. She wanted to protect all the people she wanted to protect. She definitely would not let herself repeat the same mistakes. Toward Mo Jingshan, she admitted that her heart had always been moved. She could not bear to part with him, and could not leave him. She had thought that he was the obsession of her previous lives. She thought that it was enough as long as she did not lose him again. However, she never dared to think too deeply about it. Jean Wan held onto the man's tie and suddenly felt that it was burning. She then met Mo Jingshan's eyes that were as calm as the sea. Her fingers gradually tightened around the tie. Jean Wan, what you want now? Don't you think it's more than before? For a moment, Jinwan could barely hear the praises and envious voices of the shop staff. She was lost in thought for a moment, until Mo Jingshan pressed her hand down and held it. He lowered his eyes to look at her. "Why are you in a daze?" Jinwan returned to her senses. She subconsciously recalled that they were surrounded by people, and rushed to pull her hand out. However, she was unable to do so. He did not let go. "Sir, your girlfriend must have been so mesmerized by your handsomeness that she couldn't speak." The shop staff by the side praised him with a smile. Jinwan did not speak, but her face heated up. Was she moved? She asked herself honestly. Of course she was moved. Earlier, she was moved to the point that she was afraid of herself. "Not my girlfriend. She's my wife." Mo Jingshan repeated the moment the shop staff finished speaking. Seeing that Jinwan was acting like a shy little wife, he directly said, "Wrap up the tie and the one she's wearing. Is there any other piece that you like?" The latter question was directed at Jinwan. Jinwan shook her head. "This is the only piece of female clothing in this shop that I like the most. Furthermore, I don't lack any other clothes. I'll just buy one for now." After walking out of the shop, Jinwan glanced at the man by her side who was carrying shopping bags. For some reason, she felt a sense of accomplishment to have someone like Mo Jingshan accompany her to shop. The two of them walked back to the department store by the side. With a glance, they saw Ji Mingran, who was anxiously pacing back and forth outside the door. It had already been so long, and she had yet to leave? Jinwan slightly raised her brows. At the same time, the corners of her lips curved up. The moment Ji Mingran saw the two of them, she rushed over and said in a flustered and exasperated manner, "Sister, why did you leave me behind earlier? You caused me to wait outside the club for a long time, but I still couldn't see anyone. Later on, I went to the milk tea shop by the side and sat for a while. When I came out to ask them, the people from the club said that you had already left. Why didn't you wait for me?" Jinwan coldly glanced at her. "Earlier on, you were on the phone. We thought that you had something to do, so you didn't go in. When we came out, we didn't see you and thought that you had left. I didn't even leave. I waited for you for so long, but you didn't even pick up my call." Ji Mingran's face was long from anger. Chapter 41. "Oh, when we slept last night, our phones were all set to silent. I didn't hear it." Jinwan's tone was indifferent. Ji Mingran gritted her teeth. "You're trying to get rid of me on purpose, aren't you?" Jinwan immediately glanced at her with a joking expression. "Why would I shake you off? All these years, when have I not put you, my little sister, first? Dad asked us to go out to buy things, and you had to follow us. I didn't refuse. Sister, you're obviously avoiding me on purpose. If you're annoyed that I'm coming out with you, you could have just said so when we were at home. What are you doing now?" After waiting for so long, Ji Mingran was really annoyed. "Mingran, your words are a bit too much. Every time I took you out shopping in the past, when were you not late? The longest I've ever waited for you was 2 hours. Why are you so angry just because you couldn't find us for a few hours?" "I'm anxious. I'm afraid something will happen to you and brother Jingshan." Ji Mingran did not intend to make things too awkward and changed the topic. "What could possibly happen to us? Mingran, don't blame me for scolding you. You're getting more and more surprised recently." Ji Mingran was about to explode from anger. In the end, Jinwan's words nearly caused her internal organs to bleed. She gritted her teeth, but her expression slowly turned stiff. "I was just too anxious, that's all. That's why I said a few more words." Jinwan coldly curved her lips and did not look at her again. She held Mo Jingshan's hand and entered the department store. In the end, Jinwan only bought a few simple things. Ji Mingran followed along and saw a dress that cost more than 100,000 yuan. She wanted Jinwan to swipe Mo Jingshan's card to buy it for her, but Jinwan pretended not to understand. In the end, Ji Mingran swiped the card herself with an ugly expression. In the past, no matter what Ji Mingran liked, Jinwan would buy it for her. Who would have thought that the Jinwan who used to dote on her sister to the point where many people were jealous of her would actually be so cold-blooded? He didn't even want to buy her a dress that cost more than 100,000. Ji Menggran did not find a chance to speak to him alone until they were on the car back. Right now, Jinwan was like a dog skin plaster by Mo Jingshan's side. She would not leave for even a moment. How annoying. On his way back to the Ji family, he didn't take the bus. Instead, under Ji Menggran's strong request, he changed to a private car. Jinwan did not intend to go along with Ji Menggran's wishes, but it was already past 6 in the evening. In the autumn season, the sky darkened earlier. She did not wish to waste time on the road. Ji Menggran had already called for a car from the car rental company to pick her up, so she let her be. Anyway, this day's torture was enough to make Ji Menggran's heart hurt. Right now, Jinwan's mind was completely focused on the chess record in her hands. She carefully placed it into the leather lining of her bag to prevent it from being splashed with water or stained with something dirty. Master, why did you take a detour? When Jinwan raised her head, she suddenly noticed that the route was not right. It's rush hour right now. The few roads in front are already blocked, so we can only take Haiwan Road. The driver drove the car towards Haiwan Road without hesitation, as he answered cautiously. Hearing the unusual tone in his voice, Jinwan immediately looked at Mo Jingshan, who was sitting in the passenger seat. Sure enough, Mo Jingshan had detected something wrong with the driver before she did. He had already checked the lock on the car door. Through the rearview mirror, she met his gaze and saw the answer in his eyes. The door was locked. Jinwan finally noticed that the driver's hair was slightly long, barely covering his ears. Now that she took a closer look, she discovered that there was a small black earpiece hidden in his ear, similar to the type used for surveillance. Furthermore, the driver's forehead was constantly dripping with sweat. Even though it was already autumn, the car was not that hot. He had been constantly sweating, and as he drove, his gaze hid hints of fear, confusion, and despair. Jinwan silently raised her hand and tried the back door. As expected, it was locked and could not be opened. She raised her eyes, continuing to look at Mo Jingshan through the rearview mirror. His expression remained cold and calm. The instant their eyes met, Mo Jingshan decisively reached out his hand. His arm swiftly moved to the left, pressing down on the driver's shoulder. His voice was low and heavy, but it gave off a heavy sense of danger. Stop the car. The driver's entire body instantly trembled, and the sweat on his forehead increased. He closed his eyes in despair, his voice trembling as he said, It's too late." The moment he finished speaking, the driver's head suddenly dropped forward, as though he had been drugged. He could no longer hold on and fainted. The speeding car abruptly sped forward, due to losing control of its direction. Ji Menggran, who was sitting by Jinwan's side, finally realized something was wrong. She then cried out due to the driver's strange behavior. What's wrong with the driver? What happened? Jinwan's hand rushed to open the car door. Mo Jingshan, who was sitting in front, had already decisively kicked the unconscious driver to the side. He sat in the driver's seat and took control of the steering wheel to prevent the car from losing control. 3 seconds later, he suddenly spoke. His tone carried a chill that made one feel as though they had fallen into an ice cave. The car has been modified. The speed is set at 150, and the brakes are out of order. At this speed, we can't use normal methods to slow down the car. Then what should we do? Ji Menggran screamed shrilly. Why did the driver suddenly faint? Is someone trying to kill us? Hearing Ji Menggran scream, Jinwan was certain that this murder had nothing to do with her. Furthermore, Ji Menggran was sitting in this car. There was no way she would put herself in danger. Furthermore, Mo Jingshan was also in this car. Based on her infatuation with Mo Jingshan, Ji Menggran's suspicions could be eliminated immediately. Is the fuel tank full? Jinwan stuck her head out, asking as she looked at the fuel gauge in front of Mo Jingshan. With one look, Jinwan's heart instantly sank. It was actually full. It was impossible to stop the car after the fuel ran out. It would take at least 5 to 6 hours to run out of fuel. The car's speed remained unchanged at 150 as it sped through the city. Haiwan Road was close to the large sea and open beach in the east of the city. Furthermore, it was a circular road that circled around the seaside. This kind of speed was undoubtedly suicidal during the 6 p.m. rush hour. Furthermore, there were no roads that could lead them to the suburbs or safety zones. The only way forward was to head straight for the center of the city. Mo Jingxian suddenly said coldly, "Sit tight." Ji Mingran's face was already filled with fear as she tightly gripped onto the seatbelt. Her face was already pale from fear. Jinwan silently glanced at the unconscious driver, who had been kicked to the front passenger seat. The driver clearly knew of this plot from the start. From the looks of his earphones and the drugs he had been drugged, it was likely that he was forced to risk his life to do such a thing. Who on earth was it that was so ruthless and direct? They clearly wanted them to die. Chapter 42. Right in front of them, a large truck suddenly sped over. The speed of the car was abnormally fast, heading straight in their direction. Ji Minggran abruptly screamed, what should we do? What should we do? Will we die? I don't want to die. Shut up. Jinwan harshly reprimanded her. Ji Minggran was already scared out of her wits. Her screams did not stop, and she did not have any intentions of stopping. Her hands gripped the seatbelt so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Jinwan, who had already died once, could not say that she was not afraid of this life-threatening situation, but she could still deal with it rationally. When she saw Mo Jingxian sitting in front, controlling the steering wheel and their lives, she saw the calmness in his eyes, and the fear in her heart lessened. "Open the windows," Mo Jingxian suddenly ordered. "All right." Jinwan immediately cooperated, even though she did not understand the meaning of his request in such a dangerous situation. But after reaching out to try, she raised her eyes in shock. "The doors are locked, and the windows are also locked." Mo Jingxian furrowed his brows. At the moment when he was about to collide with the truck, accompanied by a cry of despair, he abruptly turned the car around and drove straight toward the unobstructed coastline on the other side. "No, the doors won't open, we'll drown," Ji Minggran cried hoarsely. "No, I don't want to drown." But the car was already out of control. Even when she tried to stand up, her legs were too weak to move. Her entire body was plastered against the seat, her eyes filled with fear. "Quiet down." Jinwan turned to glare at her fiercely. "Do you want to be smashed into meat paste by the truck here? Or do you want to charge through the city center, losing your life while bumping into innocent people?" Fear had already taken over Ji Mingran's rationality. "If we ram them to death, then so be it. What does it have to do with me? If we charge into the sea like this, we'll definitely die. We'll die. If you yell one more time, I'll strangle you to death," Jinwan coldly said. With that, she looked up at Mo Jingxian, who had already driven the car into the sea. The moment the car plunged into the sea, she smiled at him. The car was controlled, and the doors and windows were locked. They were too far from the desolate countryside, and there were either trucks or crowds of people in the city center in front of them. Even though driving the car into the sea might be a dead end, as long as Mo Jingxian was here, she was not afraid. At first, the seawater didn't sink too quickly, but the deeper they sank, the faster it sank. The cold water gradually covered the soles of their feet. The car could no longer be controlled in the water. Mo Jingxian moved his hands away from the steering wheel. He raised his black eyes and saw Jinwan glancing at him through the rearview mirror. His heart seemed to have been struck by something. He stared into her eyes, but at the same time, she suddenly reached out and covered Mingran's mouth with a fierce expression, which was still wailing like a ghost and howling like a wolf. Mo Jingxian softly chuckled. The body of the car was sinking at a frightening speed without end. The bone-chilling seawater poured into her nose and mouth. Ji Minggran finally could no longer scream. She returned to her senses and rushed to remove her stilettos to knock against the well-sealed car window. Even though she knew this method was futile, Jinwan did not stop her. She struggled to open her eyes in the water and looked at Mo Jingxian, who was reaching for the pillow above the front passenger seat. What was he trying to do? The deeper the car sank, the greater the water pressure. Even if the car door was not locked, it could not be opened. Due to the water pressure, the car window could not be easily smashed. However, in the past few years, she had heard of a method to save herself underwater on the internet. It was to pull out the small pillow above the front passenger seat. After pulling it out, she would see two slender metal rods that were used to hold the seat in place. Although the car window could not be smashed open, it could be pried open. After prying it open, the water pressure in the car would be reduced. Only then could they break open the car window. Jin-won rushed to pull out the other one. This way, they could quickly pry open the car window with him. It was unknown how deep the car had sunk, but the feeling of suffocation was growing stronger. Thankfully, Mo Jingshin had pried open the car window first. Jin-won picked up the other metal rod and smashed it against the car window. The car window finally began to crack. Jin-won rushed forward to use her hands to pry open the excess glass. She had just reached out when Mo Jingshin directly pulled her away, using his gaze to indicate for her to use the two metal rods to knock on the other side. At this time, he was still worried that her hands would be cut. Jin-won understood and did not wish to add to his troubles. She obediently cooperated with him and opened the car windows on both sides. When they were finally able to squeeze out of the car, Jin-won's vision was already blurry from the suffocation. Mo Jingshin could see that although she was calm in the face of danger, her strength was almost completely exhausted. He reached out to carry her, using his gaze to look at her, as though asking if she could still swim up. Jin-won silently nodded in his embrace. She then pointed up and nodded again, indicating that she could swim. All of a sudden Ji-min-gran, who was struggling to squeeze out of the car window, reached out and grabbed onto Jin-won's ankle tightly. It was as though she was afraid that they would throw her into the water to wait for death. Mo Jingshin's brows furrowed. His gaze turned even colder and deeper. He glanced at Ji-min-gran. Clearly, aside from Jin-won, who was in his embrace, the life and death of others had nothing to do with him. The suffocation on Jin-won's chest was too unbearable. Right now, she did not have the strength to kick him away. She could not be bothered to think too much and decided to ignore him. Saving her life was the most important thing. Although her ankle was being grabbed and her body was becoming heavier, thankfully, Mo Jingshin had been holding on to her and did not allow her to sink further. As they swam up, because the hand on her ankle was too tight, Jin-won could not help but open her mouth in pain. She unintentionally choked on a mouthful of seawater, and her entire body tightened. It was so unbearable that she almost coughed out. She forcefully endured the pain in her chest as her hand continued to move upwards. When they finally emerged from the water, Jin-won could no longer hold it in. She coughed violently several times until her eyes turned red. This terrible feeling was too similar to when she coughed out blood and suffocated to death in her previous life. She subconsciously tightened her grip on Mo Jingshin's arm that was wrapped around her waist. She raised her eyes to see the man's deep gaze on her. "Can you still swim?" he asked softly. Jin-won resisted the coughing sound and nodded. Her voice was hoarse as she said, "It's all right. I still have strength." His heavy gaze revealed traces of worry and heartache. "It's really all right. I can do it." Jin-won's wet eyes were filled with determination. Chapter 43. Earlier, the speed of the car was too fast. From the looks of it, the beach was still 400 to 500 meters away. As Jin-won was brought forward by Mo Jingshin, she also did her best to paddle forward, trying her best to avoid giving him too much of a burden. Ji-min-gran held onto Jin-won tightly after leaving the water, unwilling to let go no matter what. "We're almost there." Jin-won saw that the beach was getting closer. "Can you still hold on?" As they neared their destination, Mo Jingshin's voice was no longer as heavy as before. Jin-won nodded. "I can." He looked at her face, and his dark eyes seemed to be surging with some kind of emotion. His low and hoarse voice was tinged with a bit of imperceptible praise. "With your physical strength, it's not easy to swim up from below, but you still have the willpower to swim over." Jin-won watched as they neared the beach, her heart relaxing. "I have to hold on. Let go of me. I can swim over by myself." Mo Jingshin finally released her. A few minutes later, they were about to reach the beach. Because the sand beneath her feet was too soft, she almost lost her balance and fell into the water again. Mo Jingshin, who had been by her side, reached out and caught her. When they finally reached the beach, Jinwan did not have any strength. Emo Jingshan held her steady. The sky had already darkened. Jinwan was shivering from the cold, but she did not forget to hold onto her bag tightly. Her teeth were chattering nonstop. The chess record for Grandfather Mo is still in my bag. My bag is slightly waterproof. And my phone has always been in the leather compartment. I don't know if it's been flooded. You're still concerned about the chess record at a time like this? Emo Jingshan looked at her soaked body. His brows, which were still handsome despite falling into the water earlier, stiffened. Right now, Jinwan was indeed not feeling too well. Her face was pale, and she was so cold that she could not even speak properly. This you won for me. And it's what Grandfather Mo likes. On an autumn night by the sea, white steam could be seen coming out of her mouth when she spoke. It was clear how cold it was. Compared to this autumn night, his gaze was much warmer. His cold brows carried a hint of tenderness for her. He reached out to push aside her messy hair that was stuck to her face. Let's leave this place first. All right. Jinwan trembled as she nodded. Her eyes seemed to sparkle under the dark sky. Ji Menggran was at the back. She collapsed on the beach and began to pant violently. She couldn't speak or move at all. Anyway, she had already followed them out of the sea. When she recovered, she would find a way to go back. After coming ashore, from beginning to end, Emo Jingshan did not even glance at her, much less say a word of concern or comfort. Ji Menggran's fingers dug deep into the sand. She was unwilling. Jinwan, what right do you have? Returning to the Yew Garden, Jinwan's mind relaxed. The moment she entered, she leaned against Emo Jingshan weakly. I came back alive. She took a deep breath, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. Today, if Emo Jingshan hadn't been in the car, if he hadn't been so decisive, and if he hadn't acted decisively to avoid danger, her second life would have been over. Emo Jingshan held her body that could no longer stand stably. It's all right now, En? Jinwan pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat through his wet clothes. Her tears almost fell uncontrollably. She sniffled, suppressing the agitation from escaping death. As though sensing the change in her emotions, Emo Jingshan patted her shoulder comfortingly. His low and unhurried voice approached her ears. You're only scared now? Earlier on in the sea, you were so brave. Mrs. Mo, you're actually crying the moment you return home? Did he mean that the image she had used her life to create today had collapsed in an instant? Jinwan almost choked out. She raised her head to look at him. Can't I be agitated? He chuckled softly, pinching her cold cheeks. Congratulations, Mrs. Mo. You've survived a disaster. You're worth celebrating. Jinwan sniffled and wanted to speak, but Emo Jingshan called for Auntie Chen. Bring her to take a hot shower and change her clothes. Auntie Chen wanted to ask what had happened to them, and why they were both soaked. However, when she saw Jinwan's pale face, she was frightened and did not dare to waste time asking. She rushed to help Jinwan back to her room. When Jinwan walked upstairs, she could not help but turn back to look at the man by the door. Emo Jingshan, who was usually well dressed, was also soaked. His shirt and trousers clung tightly to his body. However, even though he looked as disheveled as her, it did not reduce his charm in the slightest. Auntie Chen helped her to take a hot shower. Jinwan did not soak in the bath, but requested to take a shower. She had only discovered that her period had arrived when she went to the bathroom at the chess club. Madam, you're on your period. Your body is so cold. Are you really okay? Auntie Chen asked worriedly. It's all right. I'll be fine after I shower a little longer. Jinwan endured the terrible pain in her stomach and waved her hand at Auntie Chen. Help me take out the things in my bag. Check if the chess manual and cell phone in the innermost waterproof compartment have been soaked. Auntie Chen nodded and brought her dripping bag in, wiping it clean with a towel. The cell phone and the chess record in the innermost compartment are not wet, but the rest are soaked. Hearing this, Jinwan immediately released a breath of relief. That's good. Auntie Chen saw that Jinwan did not have any other instructions, and turned to help her boil some brown sugar water. Jinwan showered for a long time. It was only after Emo Jingshan had finished showering and changed his clothes that she slowly came out of the bathroom. After soaking in the cold seawater, Her stomach was in so much pain that it could kill. After being bathed in hot water for a long time, her face was no longer as pale as before. There were even some hints of red. "You're done showering?" Jinwan saw Emo Jingshan. "And come here." Emo Jingshan saw her pink and slightly red face. His Adam's apple moved, and he called out softly. Jinwan subconsciously walked toward him. The moment she approached, he suddenly pulled her into his embrace heavily. He placed a kiss on her forehead, and as though confirming that she was in no danger, he gently released a breath of air. Even though he did not make a sound, Jinwan sensitively sensed that today's situation was targeted at her. Who could it be? The Zhou family? Or the Han family? Or was it someone who had a grudge with the Ji family? In her previous life, after the Ji family went bankrupt, there were indeed many people who had grudges with the Ji family, who came to find trouble with her. In both her previous lives, Jinwan was not unfamiliar with such cases. However, today's incident was actually aimed at taking her life. By tomorrow morning at the latest, the culprit behind the scenes will definitely be found. He lowered his voice by her ear. "Don't think too much. I'll take care of everything." Jinwan was quiet for a moment. "So, you already know who is behind this?" Chapter 44. Jinwan was indeed extremely cold. Earlier on, she had forcefully held on, but now that her determination had been shattered, she curled up in the blankets and did not bother to hide it anymore. She kept shivering, but her gaze could not help but land on his body. It was only when Emo Jingshan brought in the brown sugar water that she shifted her gaze away. Something like menstrual pain was actually seen by Emo Jingshan. Really, she had thrown her face all the way to her grandmother's house. "So, who exactly wants to harm us?" Jinwan asked. She paused for a moment. "Or rather, who exactly wants me dead?" Emo Jingshan handed her the brown sugar water. "There are too many cases of wealthy families hiring killers. In the future, don't return to the Ji home too often." Jinwan was startled, but she understood. Today's incident most likely had something to do with the Ji family's enemies. After all, Ji Mengran was the one who had called for the cab. Even if Ji Mengran was completely unaware of the situation, the other party had acted through Ji Mengran's phone. This meant that they understood the Ji family very well, and had a certain grasp of Ji Mengran and Jinwan's whereabouts. Could it be Shinharu? Even if she was driven to desperation, it was impossible for her to use such a reckless method. After all, she still had the support of several aristocratic families behind her. Now was not the time to shed all pretense of cordiality. This kind of thing should not be done by her. Then who could it be? Why? Someone who wanted to kill her? Seeing the brown sugar water delivered to her, she raised it slightly and drank a mouthful. Although she felt warm after drinking it, it did not seem to alleviate much of the pain in her stomach. Half an hour later, Jinwan's stomach was still in excruciating pain. She tried her best not to be discovered by Emo Jingshan. Emo Jingshan saw that her complexion was pale, and finally lifted the blankets to enter. He directly hugged her from behind. Her entire back was pressed against his chest. Jinwan originally wanted to say that she was fine, but she still slowly relaxed in his embrace. The man's hand was warm and strong. He placed it on her abdomen, not allowing her to refuse. At the same time, he pulled the blankets higher and held her cold hands. He gently and slowly rubbed her palms. After a moment, he lowered his eyes to look at Jinwan, who still did not feel sleepy. Still in pain. Jinwan turned her head and looked at him with watery eyes. "Fortunately, it's a special situation today. It's only because the seawater was a little cold that I felt uncomfortable." The man's hand continued to gently stroke her abdomen. "I've called the doctor over. If you can't sleep, wait for the doctor to check before you sleep." "There's no need to call a doctor. It's just my period. There's really no need to trouble a doctor to come so late at night. If it still hurts tomorrow, I'll just go to the hospital to get some medicine." Jinwan quickly sat up. She had just wrapped herself in a towel, so when she sat up the towel fell off. Emo Jingshan met her gaze. On her porcelain-like skin, there were traces of kisses from last night at the Ji home. Right now, Jinwan had her period as a protective talisman, and did not think much of it. Her gaze was extremely innocent, and she was so magnanimous that it was as though she had only lost a coat. "Didn't you say this afternoon that your flight will be to England tomorrow morning?" Jinwan did not bother with the towel. She reached out to grab the blanket and casually covered her body with it. Recently, the MO Corporation had a project to discuss with a partner in England. Tomorrow, MO Jingshan would be going to England for a business trip for 2 to 3 days. She had almost forgotten about this matter. Thankfully, nothing major had happened, and it did not affect his work schedule. "There's no rush. You can sleep on the plane tomorrow." His gaze was deep as he watched her. His hand pinched her face. "Mrs. Mo had quite a fright today. I have to stay by your side." Jinwan wanted to say that she was not that delicate, but his words made her feel good. She reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck. Following her heart, she took the initiative to kiss his thin, cold lips. Her lips were a little cold, and so was his. But in an instant, her touching kiss inexplicably turned into a prairie fire. Their tongues and lips intertwined. He pressed her into his embrace and bent down to hold the back of her neck, so that the kiss could deepen. Their lips finally warmed up. At the same time, their bodies heated up as well. Jinwan was kissed until she panted and retreated slightly. The man in front of her pressed her into the bed. The lingering and scorching kiss caused her to feel slightly dizzy. She could even feel the obvious change in his lower body. It was dangerously pressing against her. Only then did Jinwan realize that she was completely unaware of the changes in the Passion Valley. Earlier she was really unguarded. Wait a minute. The situation did not seem optimistic. She suddenly whimpered against his lips. She placed her hands on his chest and felt her tongue go numb from the kiss. "I barely escaped death and swam for so long. I feel like my whole body is about to fall apart." And so, the man continued to kiss her, scattering kisses on her white neck. Jinwan's lips trembled. "So, you still have energy?" The man paused and glanced at her. His low gaze deepened because of her words. He tightened his grip on her waist and continued to kiss her, intending to prove that he was still energetic. Jinwan rushed to shout, Don't, it hurts." The man on top of her finally paused because of her shout. He lowered his head to see her holding her stomach with a pleading expression. Earlier in the day, when he heard her proudly announce that her period was coming, he had the intention to teach this woman, who was so proud that she was about to ascend to the heavens. In the end, after experiencing this storm, this little woman was completely immersed in her own thoughts. She sat on the bed without a stitch of clothing, appearing as though she was waiting for him to butcher her. Mo Jingshan released a light breath. He felt that the self-control he was once so proud of was going to be used up on her sooner or later. "Mr. Mo, Dr. Qin is here." Auntie Chen's voice came from outside the room. Mo Jingshan released Jinwan at the same time and brought her a set of pajamas. It was a very conservative style, and asked her to put it on first. "Miss Ji caught a cold during her period. Drink some medicine for a few days and keep warm. You should be fine." In the middle of the night, Qin Sighting, who was suddenly called to the Yu Garden by Mo Jingshan, did not even have the time to complain. He was forced to treat his wife who was on her period. Jinwan recognized Qin Sighting. He was the second young master of the Qin family in Haicheng. Ever since he was young, he had always been interested in medicine. At a young age, he had given up on business to study medicine. Right now, he was a well-known physician in the country, and was even a visiting professor in the medical university. With Mo Jingshan's aloof and taciturn personality, he did not have many friends. However, this young and promising Dr. Qin was one of his few closest friends. "Her stomach hurts. Is there any way to relieve it?" Mo Jingshan furrowed his brows slightly. Qin Sighting's eyelids twitched. He stared at him, as though he was looking at a monster. Someone like Mo Jingshan was actually standing here, and asking a woman how to not have a stomach ache during her period. Chapter 45. Go to a traditional Chinese medicine hospital and get some prescriptions to warm up the womb, or take some of my Western medicine. But she's had this illness since she was young. It's best to slowly treat her with traditional Chinese medicine, Qin Sighting said unhurriedly. At the same time, he glanced at Jinwan, who was climbing up from the bed. In the past, this eldest Miss Ji used to look at people very fiercely, but now she was like an obedient little wife. When he entered the door just now, he almost thought he was seeing things. Chinese medicine? Auntie Chen took me to get some before, but I didn't drink much. Jinwan got out of bed, opened the drawer of the bedside cabinet, and rummaged through it. In the end, both Qin Sighting and Mo Jingshan's gaze landed on a small white medicine bottle in the corner of the drawer. What is that? Qin Sighting's voice suddenly turned cold. Mo Jingshan also looked at Jinwan, who was stunned, and when she took out the bottle of medicine with a look of realization, he reached out to take it. Qin Sighting walked over and took the 2 pills. He took a few glances and put them to his nose to sniff. Miss Ji, have you seen a psychiatrist? Qin Sighting suddenly asked. Jinwan was stunned. She looked at Qin Sighting, and then at Mo Jingshan, whose expression was unbelievably cold. In the past, Ji Mengran had coaxed her into seeing a psychiatrist because she was in a bad mood. This was also the medication the doctor prescribed for her to alleviate her depression. Ever since she brought it back, she had only taken it a few times. She had even forgotten about the existence of this bottle of medicine in the bedside table, because she didn't think that her mood during that period of time had reached the stage of depression. Although Ji Mengran always said that if she continued to be depressed, something would definitely happen. Ji Mengran wanted to take her to see a psychiatrist and find someone to give her psychological counseling. Those doctors also gave her all kinds of inexplicable advice, telling her to get a divorce immediately so that she could be free as soon as possible. Could it be that this medicine has a problem? Ji Mengran had such a good relationship with Shen Haru. It was not entirely impossible for her to do something to the medicine. Jinwan took a step back. She didn't know what she was afraid of. She inadvertently raised her eyes and met Mo Jingshan's. Mo Jingshan watched her, his voice carrying a hint of sternness. Have you taken this medicine? Jinwan nodded and then shook her head. I ate it a few times, but I felt uncomfortable after eating it, so I didn't eat it again. When did you eat it? Qin Sighting stood at the side and asked coldly. His attitude was not as casual as before. When we were married for just over a month, I was in a particularly bad state. Meng Ran said that she was afraid that I would be too depressed, and brought me to see a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist then prescribed this medicine for me. Jinwan confessed honestly, but her heart was already ringing with alarm. This medicine was definitely not simple. Mo Jingshan stared at her for a long while. The corners of his lips slowly lifted, revealing a deep, mocking smile. But Jinwan felt that his mocking expression was not directed at her. She suspected that there was something wrong with the medicine Shen Haru had given her father, but she had actually forgotten to investigate what exactly the medicine Ji Mengran had forced the doctor to prescribe for her was. This matter had happened too long ago, and she had completely forgotten about it. She could not recall it at all. 10 minutes later. This medicine does not have any effects on the body, but it contains a mixture of drugs that can cause a person's nerves to go haywire and a mild nervous breakdown. Qin Sighting pinched the crushed pill in his hand. This is a supplementary medicine used by some small psychiatry clinics to increase the mental activity of patients. It can make it easier for patients with mental illnesses to check for symptoms. In large hospitals, it is not allowed to be used. It is considered a type of banned medicine. Nervous breakdown. Jinwan raised her eyes. Qin Sighting raised his brows, his voice soft and light as he sneered. Miss Ji, your emotions and actions in the past few months seem to be consistent with this symptom. The meaning behind his words was already clear. It turned out that this was the reason why Ji Mengran kept saying that she had become unreasonable in front of Mo Jingshan. Qin Sighting glanced at Jinwan's expression and casually smiled. This medicine doesn't contain any harmful ingredients. Even if you take it, it won't be easily discovered. Since you didn't take much, there shouldn't be a problem. So, Qin Sighting removed the sterilized gloves in his hands, raising his chin to glance at Mo Jingshan. He spoke as though he was watching a good show. CEO Mo called me over in the middle of the night, just because your woman took the wrong medicine? Jinwan, Mo Jingshan's tall and straight figure stood by the door. He looked at the bottle of medicine and slowly placed one hand into his pocket. His thin lips curved slightly. It was a smile, but it was cold. Jinwan had thought that in this life, she was sufficiently clear-headed and prepared. However, at this moment, she still felt a chill run down her spine. Her hand suddenly warmed. Mo Jingshan approached to hold it. Feeling the coldness of her hand, he calmly tightened his grip. Qin Siding put away his things and removed his white coat. He was only wearing a shirt and trousers underneath. His gaze was light as he watched this scene. You came here in the middle of the night to do free labor. And you even want to feed me a mouthful of dog food? You guys are simply inhumane. Mo Jingshan's thin lips spat out emotionlessly. Do you lack women? Who did not know that in Qin Siding's office in the hospital, there were countless unmarried young ladies who would purposely feign pneumonia or pretend to be sick just to see him. There was a saying in Haicheng that it was better to provoke the smiling fox young Master Qin than to provoke the cold-faced Yama Mo Jingshan. South Qin and North Mo, the two most difficult male gods to deal with among Haicheng's four large families. Although the Ji family was also one of Haicheng's four large families, in recent years, the Ji family's limelight was no longer as prosperous as it was many years ago. However, the Mo family's foundation had never been shaken. Not to mention Haicheng. If any one of the Mo family members stomped their feet, the nearby provinces would be shaken. Any member of the Mo family was an unparalleled figure. In the military, political, and business realms, there were different divisions, and each had an extraordinary status. I don't lack women, but your woman is really too simple-minded. Qin Siding tilted his head, calmly glancing at Jinwan. Jinwan's forehead twitched, saying that she was simple-minded, saying that she had eaten the wrong medicine. Very good. She turned to look at Mo Jingshan by her side. It's already so late, yet Dr. Qin specially drove over because of your call. Does he owe you a favor? Qin Siding tilted his head to look at her, his brows slightly furrowing. He seemed to have suddenly discovered that this Jinwan was somewhat interesting. Mo Jingshan, you can say that. Jinwan's eyes immediately brightened. Then, on account of your face, can I ask him to help me with another favor? Chapter 46. Jinwan took out the medicine she had brought back from the Ji family and presented it to him. This is the medicine my father has been taking recently. Since Dr. Qin is skilled in medicine management, can you help me analyze the ingredients in this? You really treat me as the Yu Garden's private doctor? Qin Siding raised his brows. Jinwan had yet to speak when a low voice sounded from behind her. You're not. Qin Siding's brows were about to explode. His lips trembled, but he suddenly turned his face away and snorted. He took the medicine from Jinwan's hands and opened it to smell it. The smell of this medicine is not clear. It should be a new type of medicine imported from abroad. There's no point in directly analyzing it here. I need a machine to analyze it. Do you mind if I take it away? I don't mind, Jinwan hurriedly said. Qin Siding tossed the medicine into his pocket. All right, it's getting late. If there's nothing else, I'll leave first. In front of the Yu Garden the moon was bright. Qin Siding walked out of the front door of the villa, casually adjusting the collar of his shirt. The white coat casually placed on his arm was dazzlingly white under the moonlight. I heard that you specially sent people to monitor the Zhou family's every move? Qin Siding asked casually. Mo Jingshan raised his eyelids, a cold smile flashing across his eyes. Are you trying to say that you're well informed? Is it because of the woman inside? Qin Siding continued to ask coldly. Mo Jingshan calmly said, You can scram now. Qin Siding raised his brows, lifting the corner of his lips. His voice was cold. Don't tell me, towards this Jinwan, you're starting to get serious? Mo Jingshan tilted his head to look at him. After a long time without receiving a reply, Qin Siding smiled mildly. Lost control? This isn't your original intention of marrying her. Are you prepared to be the first person to be kicked out of the Yu Garden, Dr. Qin? Mo Jingshan's gaze was unruffled. Qin Siding snorted. I drove over so late at night. And you're not even going to say a word of thanks? First, return the life you owe me. The sound of the car leaving could be heard. Jinwan was in the room, opening the curtains to look outside. When Mo Jingshan returned, the first thing he saw was this little woman pressing her face against the cold window. She appeared as though she had suddenly realized something, and was deep in thought. Dr. Qin left. Jinwan heard the door and turned back. Yes. Mo Jingshan watched as she pressed her entire body against the cold window, calmly saying, "It's too cold in front of the window. Don't lean so close." Jinwan turned and walked up to her. "Tell me, if I hadn't been disturbed by all these things, would I have fallen in love with you Before she could finish her sentence, the man suddenly kissed her. The kiss was a little heavy, a little deep, and even a little impolite. Jinwan only had time to let out a low whimper. Her waist was circled, and in the blink of an eye, she was pushed against the wall by him. He kissed her until her lips began to feel numb, and her entire body softened to the point where she could barely stand. She didn't quite understand. Why did he suddenly make her feel like he was kissing her with some sort of aggressive emotion? After a long time, the man's lips were still pressed against hers. Gradually, he pressed his forehead against hers, and his eyes locked onto hers. Jinwan felt that if they continued kissing, neither of them would be able to sleep tonight. Besides, he had to go to the airport first thing in the morning. The moment she thought of the 3 days of separation, she directly buried her head against his neck, softly saying, "Stop kissing. If you continue, you'll lose control. It's not like you don't know my special situation today." When Mo Jingshan heard the words "lose control," he did not speak for a moment. A moment later, Jinwan heard the man's voice land on top of her head. "How many days? What do you mean by how many days?" She raised her head. The moment she met the man's burning gaze, she immediately coughed in embarrassment. For days, sometimes 5 days. Every month, her great-aunt would only end after 4 to 5 days. It had always been very accurate. After thinking for a moment, she said, "So tonight, if you don't plan on sleeping in the master bedroom, because you don't want to rest well, I don't mind." Seeing her relaxed and radiant expression, Mo Jingshan's heart moved. He held the back of her head, and lowered his head to kiss her. Jinwan was kissed until she did not even have the strength to push him away. She had just softened in his embrace, when she heard the man's low and hoarse voice press against her lips. "Wait for me to come back. Then I'll deal with you. Wait for him to come back. Wait for him to come back from England in a few days." Jinwan's heart trembled along with his voice. Her 2 hands circled around his neck, reluctantly replying hoarsely, "In." Under the misty moonlight, he seemed to smile. Then he kissed her deeply, kissing her until her limbs were weak. Even her voice sounded like a cat's meowing. Finally, he let her go. He carried her, who was kissed until she no longer had any strength left, to the bed. He lifted the blankets and stuffed her in. This man's restraint and calmness were too strong. Under such circumstances, he could still stay in the master bedroom and hug her to sleep. However, to Jinwan, this could be considered a gift. After all, he would be flying to England tomorrow. If the 2 of them had to sleep in separate rooms tonight, she most likely would not be able to sleep well. The next morning, Jinwan originally wanted to wake up early to send Mo Jingshan off. In the end, she slept in his arms the entire night. She slept too soundly and deeply. When he left, he did not wake her up. When she woke up in the morning, it was already past 7. Auntie Chen said that Mo Jingshan had already left at 5 in the morning. Jinwan sat by the dining table, eating breakfast alone. She stirred the porridge in her bowl in boredom. She really did not expect that Mo Jingshan would only fly to England for a few short days. From the very first day, she actually began to miss him to death. This heart that was gradually becoming restless because of him. Could it be considered paying back what she owed him in their previous life? "Madam, do you not have an appetite?" Auntie Chen saw that she did not drink much porridge, and brought her a glass of milk. Jinwan received the cup and placed it down. She did not drink it. She supported her chin with one hand, and continued to stir the porridge in the bowl. She casually asked, "Auntie Chen, in the past, did Mo Jingshan always return on time when he went on a business trip? For example, if he was away for 3 days, would he really return in 3 days? Or would he occasionally be delayed by a few days?" Or would he bring it forward? Auntie Chen immediately smiled in understanding. It turned out that she was already lovesick as soon as they separated. In the past, Mr. Mo would not return for 10 days to half a month. She had never seen Jinwan so despondent. He had only just left, and she was already counting the days. Sir rarely talks about the company's matters at home. I'm not sure how long he goes on a business trip. Jinwan continued to stir the porridge in the bowl, glancing at the clear, bright sky outside. She felt as though her mood had flown away with him. All of a sudden, the phone placed on the table rang. Jinwan lowered her eyes to see Mo Jingshan's private number flashing on the screen. Even she herself did not notice the change in her expression. She quickly picked up the call. "You're awake." Chapter 47. Seeing that you were sleeping too soundly, I couldn't bear to. Mo Jingshan chuckled softly. Auntie Chen watched from the side. Jinwan's lips were suddenly smiling, as though a flower was about to bloom. Although she did not speak, her smile was silently sweet. "Have you eaten breakfast?" "Not yet." Jinwan gently stirred the porridge in the bowl. The man's voice immediately turned harsh. "Auntie Chen didn't make breakfast for you?" "She did. I'm eating now. I woke up too late, and just came down to eat." Her lack of appetite was her own problem. She definitely could not shift the blame to Auntie Chen. "Eat properly. Things like last night, I'll take care of them in the future. Don't let your imagination run wild." This was he here to supervise her eating breakfast and to comfort her? Jinwan was like a kitten being caressed. She responded with an, "Oh," and took the opportunity when Auntie Chen left to whisper, "I'm afraid my appetite won't be good these 3 days. If you want me to eat properly, you have to come back early." Mo Jingshan. Did she mean that without him around, she wouldn't even be able to eat properly? In the past, she wanted to push him 800 feet away, but now, she was acting like a spoiled child. Mo Jingshan chuckled softly and hoarsely. "Be obedient. Finish the breakfast Auntie Chen made. You're not allowed to leave a single bite." Jinwan glanced at the porridge, and more than 10 soup dumplings on the table. "How can I possibly eat so much? Even if I can't, I have to eat." Although Jinwan said she couldn't eat, she began to eat the porridge while talking on the phone. She then picked up the soup dumplings, but Auntie Chen rushed over to take them away. "Madam, it's a little cold after being left out for too long. Let me heat them up for you." Jinwan immediately mouthed to her, "Just heat a few less." In the end, after Jinwan hung up the phone, Auntie Chen brought out the soup dumplings a few minutes later. It was still an entire basket, more than 10 of them. Seeing Jinwan's expression, Auntie Chen said with a smile, "Before Mr. Mo left, he said that while he's not around, madam, you have to eat all 3 meals at home. You have to have a balanced diet, and you can't eat too little. Sir said you've been too thin recently." Jinwan lowered her head to look at her chest. She had what she should have, and what should be big. It wasn't that she was thin. The next day, the Lanshan residence was located in a secluded location in the center of Haicheng. Jinwan walked in and saw that the hedonistic young master, Han Tianyuan, was currently seated in front of a mahjong table, playing cards. "Miss Ji came so early? Come. Let's play a few rounds together." Han Tianyuan held the cigarette in his mouth as he smiled at her with narrowed eyes. Jinwan calmly glanced at the few people inside. They were all young masters of Haicheng's upper class. She expressionlessly took out the agreement she had just brought from the Han Corporation's legal department. Ignoring Han Tianyuan's narrowed eyes, she directly placed the agreement on the round tea-colored table to the side. "The transfer agreement has been prepared by your company's legal department. Come here and sign it." Jinwan had never been interested in such occasions. Her fingers gently tapped on the table, showing her impatience. Han Tianyuan used the tip of his tongue to touch the corner of his mouth, pushed his cards, and snorted as he got up and walked over. "Miss Ji, are you sure you want to take over the 2 real estate companies under my name?" "What else?" Han Tianyuan sloppily sat on the sofa in front of her. In the end, a newborn calf isn't afraid of a tiger. Right now the real estate market is clearly in a tight spot. If Miss Ji insists on taking over the companies in my hands during this time of crisis, when the time comes, and you lose a few $100 million. Please don't come crying to me. Jinwan ignored him, patiently waiting for him to sign. Miss G is indeed as arrogant as before. To think that back when I was chasing after you, you had such an insufferably arrogant expression. Ah. As he spoke, Han Tianyuan received the pen that his secretary handed over. At the same time he mocked. It seems like Miss G's skills in bed are impressive. Otherwise, how could you have subdued Mo Jingxian? Jinwan expressionlessly looked at Han Tianyuan. Her gaze was cold. You're talking so much nonsense, just to sell the companies. Are you complaining that I'm giving you too much money? 30 million yuan was nothing more than giving face to the Han family. Otherwise, based on the situation that day, with Mo Jingxian present, this Han Tianyuan most likely would not even dare to ask for 30 cents. Han Tianyuan's expression turned slightly ugly. He snorted, but in the end he still quickly signed. Jinwan checked the agreement, and could not be bothered to say another word to him. She turned to leave. Miss G. Han Tianyuan suddenly called out to her in a lazy voice. Jinwan did not turn back to look at him. She only indifferently glanced at the sky outside the Lanshan residence. The weather these 2 days was not bad. She could go out for a walk and settle the handover of the company as soon as possible. Han Tianyuan's tone carried an unclear meaning. Mo Jingxian's background is not as simple as you think. On account of your 30 million yuan, don't blame me for not reminding you. Jinwan glanced at him from the corner of her eyes. At this moment, a waiter from the Lanshan residence came over with coffee and desserts, placing them on the table in front of him. Miss G, do you not intend to sit down and eat before leaving? Jinwan's lips revealed a faint cold smile. Young Master Han, enjoy your meal. After finishing her words, she held the agreement in her hands and walked away without looking back. Before signing the agreement, Jinwan had already investigated the situation of the 2 real estate companies. She knew what Han Tianyuan meant when he said to be careful not to lose a few $100 million yuan. Their internal funds were already lacking, and they even owed the bank more than 10 million yuan. However, under the company's name, there were 2 half-completed Seagull residential areas, as well as a commercial building close to the city center. However, due to the lack of funds, construction was temporarily halted. Buying over these 2 companies, in anyone's eyes, was an act of seeking death. However, Jinwan had carefully studied the unfinished buildings under the company's name. The locations were all very good. From what she remembered, not long after, when the price of real estate and land in the country continued to soar, the buildings in these areas were no longer real estate that ordinary people could afford. If they were to multiply, they would be worth at least 400 million yuan. Right now, the problem was that the 2 companies had changed their legal heads. If the previous partners immediately withdrew their investments because of this, it would be extremely disadvantageous to her. Just as Jinwan was preparing to drive back to the Yu Garden, Han Tianyuan suddenly walked out of the Lanshan residence and knocked on her car window. Here, take this. He handed her a gilded invitation letter. Jinwan received it, opening it to take a look. Banquet invitation letter? Right now, what you're most worried about is the partners withdrawing their investments. The day after tomorrow's charity banquet, there will be many investors who have worked with our Han family for many years present. You understand, I've already given you this opportunity. Whether or not you can succeed will depend on your own abilities. How do you know I won't be able to get this invitation letter? Jinwan was suspicious. Chapter 48. Her instincts told her that this hedonistic son of the Han family would definitely not be so friendly to her. Before this, she had already considered this matter. However, the host of this charity banquet was the Han family. The Ji family was not participating. Furthermore, the number of invitations was limited. At this moment, she really did not know how she could successfully attend this banquet. Originally, she had planned to choose another path. She did not expect that Han Tianyuan would directly hand the invitation to her. Based on Han Tianyuan's temperament, he could not wait for her to be unlucky. He could not wait for the company to close down and everyone in Haicheng to watch the show with him. Would he be so kind? Han Tianyuan placed his hands in his pockets and turned around. He scolded with a smile. Although the company has changed owners, the founder still has my, Han Tianyuan's, name engraved on it. If it really closes down, I really can't afford to lose this face. Furthermore, no matter what, I have to give some face to the person behind you, Mo Jingshan. It's just two real estate companies. It's not a big business. Why would young Master Han care so much? Jinwan did not believe him at all. However, she still smiled leisurely. What founder? Didn't you snatch this company from someone else's hands back then? Do you want it? If you don't, I'll take it away. Han Tianyuan calmly glanced at her. I created an opportunity for you out of goodwill. Do you have to be like a hedgehog that pierces a few holes in someone else's body to feel comfortable? You, Miss G, are naturally unreasonable. If it weren't for the fact that your face is truly beautiful, this old man would not have bothered to do you this favor. This is a world that only cares about appearances. Serves you right. This old man was once bewitched by your face. Even now, I still remember it. After speaking, he directly threw the invitation into her car. A world that only cared about appearances. These words coming from someone like Han Tianyuan's mouth were not abrupt. He was indeed this shallow. Otherwise, Jinwan would not have ignored him even once. She did not say more. She picked up the invitation and glanced at it. She only calmly said, "Thanks." Han Tianyuan raised his brows. He coldly snorted and turned to leave. Returning to the Lanshan residence, he picked up his phone and sent out a message. The invitation has been delivered. 2 days later, the Sea City Business Alliance charity banquet was held at the Royal Garden Hotel. At 8 o'clock in the evening, the lobby of the hotel was bustling with activity. Although Haicheng had many prominent families, they were also divided into different factions. The Ji family and the Han family did not have much cooperation. So Jinwan was not familiar with the upper-class people who came today. There was a waiter leading the way in front of the hotel. When Jinwan walked in, she saw people drinking and chatting in groups. In the brightly lit hall, there were all kinds of exquisite snacks and drinks. The guests entered one after another. "Miss, would you like a glass of champagne?" Jinwan was walking in when a waiter came up with a tray of champagne in his hand and handed it to her respectfully and politely. Almost everyone around was holding a wine glass. Jinwan did not suspect anything and reached out to receive it. However, her fingers paused on the glass, and she glanced at the waiter. After all, she wasn't familiar with the people here, and it was too easy for her to get the invitation. She had to be careful. "I'm sorry, my stomach isn't feeling too good. Do you have mineral water? Help me pour a glass of water?" The waiter nodded and turned to bring the water. Jinwan saw that the bottle he brought was clean and unopened. She only reached out to receive it after he poured the water into a wine glass. She lowered her eyes to look at the clear glass. The water inside was clean and without any impurities. The banquet hall was filled with the fragrance of clothes and the fragrance of various high-grade perfumes. It had been a long time since Jinwan participated in such an event in her previous life. She was not used to the smell and choked uncomfortably. She cleared her throat and lowered her head to drink a mouthful of water. In the distance, Zhou Yinyan, who was standing in the corner, glanced at Jinwan. Seeing that she had drunk the water, she immediately wore a satisfied smile. She knew that this Jinwan was very shrewd and guarded against others. She would not easily drink the wine that was handed to her. She had smeared a lot of the powerful medicine into the goblets that she had prepared beforehand. In order to avoid any accidents, she had personally prepared the goblets. She had smeared so much of it inside and outside. As long as Jinwan drank anything from the glass, it was guaranteed that she would not be able to escape tonight. Wasn't she, Jinwan, relying on Mo Jingshan's protection? After tonight, after Jinwan had been taken by several men, let's see if Mo Jingshan would still place this broken flower in his eyes. After tonight, even if she had 3 heads and 6 arms, she would definitely not be able to escape. Jinwan only took a sip. She seemed to have sensed the gaze from the corner and immediately shifted the glass away. His clean and fair fingers gently rubbed the side of the cup. After pausing for a moment, his eyes suddenly turned and looked in the direction of the corner. Although Zhou Yinyan's position was very far away, and the lighting there was very dim, Jin Wan was still able to see her. Her hand paused on the edge of the glass. Without batting an eyelid, she glanced at Zhou Yinyan's flickering gaze that she had noticed. Zhou Yinyan was here? After the previous incident, the Zhou family actually allowed her to attend such a banquet. Her gaze earlier, Jin Wan placed the glass in her hand down, suspecting that this was a trap. She cautiously turned around, only to see that the banquet had already begun. There were too many people entering from the main entrance, and the main entrance was temporarily closed. She directly headed toward the bathroom, temporarily avoiding the crowd. There was no one in the bathroom. Jin Wan stood in front of the mirror and released cold water to wash her hands. As she washed, she calmed herself down and thought about how she could successfully leave this place. In such a situation, if she only considered Han Tianyuan, no matter how much courage he had, he would not dare to do anything to her in such a place. However, if it was Zhou Yinyan who had lost all her face not long ago, then that might not be the case. Once a woman wanted revenge, there was nothing she could do. However, as she washed her hands, she felt her vision gradually turning blurry. An unfamiliar heat surged through her body. Jin Wan was confused. She raised her head to look at herself in the mirror. When he saw that his own face was also gradually showing a bit of a flirtatious blush, alarm bells instantly rang in his heart. Earlier on, she did not drink any alcohol. She had personally seen the bottle of mineral water being opened. Furthermore, she had only taken a sip. How could it be? Are you surprised? All of a sudden, Zhou Yinyan turned into the bathroom from an unknown direction. Seeing Jin Wan's guarded gaze, she coldly laughed. Did you think that it would be fine just because you didn't drink? As expected, Miss G's background is clean. You've never come into contact with the erotic circles of the upper class. There are many types of drugs that can be used to deal with disobedient women. One of them is to smear it on the glass. Just a little bit of your saliva is enough to make you excited for an entire night and lose all rationality. Furthermore, you even took a sip. On that glass, I personally smeared quite a bit of drug. You drugged me in such a place. Jin Wan forced herself to calm down. The effects of the drug took effect very quickly. She placed one hand on the sink and stared coldly at Zhou Yinyan. Chapter 49. Zhou Yinyan had a disdainful smile on her face. Do you think that it is so easy to ruin my reputation? You caused me to be locked up at home for so many days. Jin Wan, I want to see if tomorrow morning's news will be about the Ji family's eldest miss having an illicit affair with a group of men. It's better for you to take the blame for something as immoral as ruining my reputation. So the medicine on the cup just now was indeed what she had guessed. Zhou Yinyan, you're really crazy. Jin Wan scolded. She tightened her grip on her bag and turned to leave. Zhou Yinyan turned around and saw that she was about to lose her balance. She smiled and walked over, directly twisting her arm. You want to leave? Do you think you can walk out today? There are many people hidden here that I have arranged. Every step you take, they will be able to see you. Jin Wan, just accept your fate. Tonight, I guarantee that you'll wish you were dead. You should moan softly when you're feeling good. Or else you'll summon more men and let everyone see you perform a live erotic act. With that, she dragged Jin Wan out and dragged her into the elevator in the dimly lit corridor in front of the bathroom door. Jin Wan gritted her teeth to stay awake, but no matter what, she was unable to resist the invasion of the drug. Her eyes were in a daze, and she could not push Zhou Yinyan's hand away. Let go. Jin Wan managed to regain some consciousness. She twisted her hand and tried to pull it out. After tonight, you'll probably have to thank me. After all, I found so many strong men and fed them the same medicine as you. Just thinking about it makes my blood boil. Hearing Zhou Yinyan's words, all the hair on Jin Wan's body stood on end. She struggled even more, but was abruptly pushed into the elevator by Zhou Yinyan. Her back slammed heavily against the wall of the elevator. Due to the pain, Jin Wan's mind became clear. She struggled to steady herself and raised her head to look at Zhou Yinyan's crazed and proud gaze. Zhou Yinyan, I'm warning you. Usually when you bicker, it's just the speed of your tongue. What you're doing now is breaking the law. Ha! Can the law control me? When you enter the room, you'll be the one having sex with those men. Tomorrow morning, a group of reporters will barge in and take pictures of you. Just the fact that you gathered a crowd to sell sex is enough for the police to take you away. The surveillance cameras on the upper floors of the hotel have been tampered with. No one saw me appear here. Your confession has no legal effect at all. As Zhou Yinyan spoke, she lifted her long hair and glanced at Jinwan proudly. Jinwan, Haicheng's #1 socialite? Haha, so many men are drooling over your looks and body. Tonight, I must fulfill their wishes. The elevator stopped on the 10th floor of the hotel. Jinwan subconsciously leaned against the back and refused to move. Zhou Yinyan directly pulled her out. Ah! All of a sudden, Zhou Yinyan cried out in pain. Before she could react, Jinwan's nails had abruptly scratched the back of her hand. The pain caused Zhou Yinyan to instantly glare at her in anger. Jinwan took the opportunity to turn and run to the emergency exit next to the elevator. She pushed open the door of the escalator and ran down, but her legs were weak and her body was weak. Her body was so hot that she could not run too fast. Hearing Zhou Yinyan's footsteps approaching from behind, Jinwan ran while her hands trembled as she reached into her bag. She had to call the police. However, her movements were too fast. As she ran, she swiped her phone and was unable to enter the passcode. The footsteps behind her grew closer and closer, accompanied by Zhou Yinyan's shouts. Do you think you can still run out today? Jinwan, you're too naive. Jinwan's body was already covered in a thin layer of sweat. Her lips were bleeding from her bite, and her fingers were still hurriedly tapping on the phone screen. As she ran, her fingers were unable to accurately enter the numbers. All of a sudden, her cell phone rang, and Mo Jingxin's number appeared in front of her eyes. Mo Jingxin? He's back. Seeing that it was Mo Jingxin's call, Jinwan rushed to answer the call with her trembling fingers. Just as Zhou Yinyan's hand was about to tug on her hair, she shouted at the phone that was already connected. Jingxin, save me. Her long hair was abruptly pulled back by Zhou Yinyan. Her phone was also instantly slapped onto the ground. She was forcefully dragged back by Zhou Yinyan. Her back knocked against the stairs several times, causing Jinwan's face to turn pale from the pain. Zhou Yinyan, you lunatic. I'm from the Mo family. You dare to touch me? Are you tired of living? Jinwan's clothes were torn into a sorry state by Zhou Yinyan. After returning to the 10th floor, Zhou Yinyan lifted her up. Her face was filled with excitement as she looked at Jinwan's sorry figure. She smiled and said, "It's good that Mo Jingxin found out. Such a good show. If he were to miss it, wouldn't it be a pity?" As she spoke, she directly pulled Jinwan to a room at the end of the corridor. The position of this room was not only able to avoid the hotel's surveillance cameras, but the surveillance cameras had already been tampered with by Zhou Yinyan. Jinwan was indeed brought here without anyone noticing. It was actually such a meticulous plan. The moment the door opened, Jinwan endured it and did not make a sound. Zhou Yinyan shouted toward the inside. "Handsome brothers, are you all stifled? This great aunt has brought a woman for you." Finishing her words, she directly pulled Jinwan in with force. She opened the door wide and was about to push Jinwan into the dark room. However, all of a sudden, Zhou Yinyan felt a sharp pain on her arm. Spurred on by Jinwan's anger, she pushed the door open first and stumbled in. "What are you doing?" Jinwan used the last of her strength to close the door. She saw that there was a key on the glass table by the door. She decisively picked up the key and locked the door from the outside. "Jinwan, open the door for me." Zhou Yinyan did not expect that she would be pushed into this room. She heard the sound of the people behind her approaching. They had all been drugged and did not have any rationality. She was so frightened that she frantically slammed the door. Her hands twisted the lock with force, but no matter how hard she tried, she could not open it. Jinwan opened the door. "Ah, it's your own stupidity. Such a brainless plan filled with loopholes. In the end, you suffered the consequences of your own actions. You deserve it." Jinwan coldly and indifferently looked at the tightly shut door. Very quickly, The sound of several men's heavy breathing could be heard. Zhou Yinyan's even more frightened voice could be heard as she slammed the door and screamed. Jinwan, quickly let me out. Don't lock me in here. Let me out. I was wrong. Let me go. I beg you, quickly let me out. Jinwan. I beg you. Don't come over. Don't touch me. Open your eyes and look at who I am. Look clearly. Don't touch me. Jinwan, I was really wrong. I apologize to you. Quickly open the door. Jinwan ignored them and turned to leave. However, her legs weakened, and she almost fell in front of the door. Chapter 50. She forcefully endured the raging heat in her body, as countless waves of fire interweaved in her mind. She wanted to walk out, but she could no longer stand steadily. Earlier, she had used all her strength to push Zhou Yinyan in, and barely protected herself. Right now she was so weak that she had no strength left. Jinwan raised her reddened eyes. She could not continue like this. Her phone was already broken. There was no way to call the police. She had to hurry to the first floor, and think of a way to escape. From the door behind her, Zhou Yinyan's pig-like screams could be heard. The sound of her body being cruelly dragged on the floor, the muffled sound of something being knocked against, and the lustful laughter of several men. Jinwan was unable to feel the slightest bit of sympathy for this. She expressionlessly staggered toward the elevator. People like Zhou Yinyan deserved retribution, since the room was filled with a group of drugged men who had lost their minds. Who would care if she was Zhou Yinyan or another woman? Jinwan's lips curved coldly. She did not turn back as she entered the elevator. When the elevator reached the first floor, the banquet was still going on. Jinwan walked in the opposite direction of the hotel lobby to the other side of the corridor, trying to find another exit. Her legs were soft, and her steps were unstable. Her vision was already blurry, and she did not know how much longer she could hold on. All of a sudden, the door of a private room at the corner of the corridor opened. Jinwan did not expect the door behind her to suddenly open. Her vision was already blurry, and she lost control of her body and fell into the room. She was unable to maintain her consciousness. She felt as though she had been roughly thrown onto the large sofa in the private room. Two men who reeked of alcohol approached her. They asked in a rough voice, "Where did this girl come from? Why is she so beautiful? Who the K knows where she came from?" This old man was just about to go to the toilet when I opened the door and picked up a beautiful little beauty. Looking at her dressing, she should have come from the hotel on the other side of the corridor. Damn! Top quality. She was a rare beauty. Her face was tender and delicate, and her appearance was both charming and charming. If we K her, it would probably be so satisfying. Do you think she drank too much? Or did someone put something in her wine? Hurry up and lock the door. Don't let anyone in. Lock the door for what? Nonsense. K her. She's already so soft. If we don't K her, it'll be a waste. Go. Jinwan heard the sound and struggled to open her eyes. All she saw were two unfamiliar faces. Both of them were filled with obscenities and various disgusting desires. Vigilance rose in her heart. She struggled for a while, but her whole body was weak. Just as she was about to try to get up, she was suddenly pulled up by one of the men. In the banquet hall, people were toasting each other. Han Tianyuan anxiously walked out of the banquet hall. Earlier, when he saw that Zhou Yinyan and Jinwan's figures had disappeared, his palms had been sweating. Tonight, he helped Zhou Yinyan set up this trap. Did he King go overboard? 2 days ago, if he had not been set up by Zhou Yinyan and forced to play such a despicable game with her, he would not have taken such a huge risk to dig a hole for her. She heard that Mo Jingxian was abroad for the next few days. Hopefully Zhou Yinyan, that woman, would be able to settle this quickly. When the media came tomorrow and captured the scene in the room, this biggest scandal among the rich and powerful would become the most effective protective talisman against Mo Jingxian. But why did his eyelids keep twitching nonstop? Han Tianyuan walked down the marble staircase in front of the hotel with a heavy heart. He was preparing to leave this place to avoid being caught. All of a sudden, a piercing light flashed before his eyes. A black ghost sped over like a cheetah in the darkness. Behind it was a black Maybach, appearing in the streets of Haicheng in the middle of the night. Mo Jingshan alighted from the car, slamming the door shut. His gaze was cold and filled with a chill. Mo Jingshan? Wasn't he not in the country? He actually returned. The moment he saw Mo Jingshan, it was as though Han Tinyuan's feet were rooted to the ground. A gust of cold wind blew past his back. He quickly avoided his gaze, pretending that he did not see anything. He raised his hand to his mouth and coughed, turning his face away as he walked to the other side. Mo Jingshan did not give him the chance to escape. He ignored Shen Mu and the rest who were quickly approaching, his gaze cold as he walked over. When he reached the marble staircase, his voice was extremely heavy and cold. Which family's dog dares to bite my people? This dog will end up with a fate worse than death. Han Tianyuan gripped his phone, but he knew that he could not act rashly at this moment. Similarly, as a member of Haicheng's upper class, he was not a simple character in this upper-class society. However, Mo Jingshan's deterrence was one that no one dared to provoke. Regardless of whether it was the Mo family or the power and wealth that Mo Jingshan had controlled for so many years, they could not be underestimated. If they were to clash head-on, they would definitely die. Han Tianyuan forced himself to calm down, smiling in a seemingly relaxed manner. CEO Mo, what do you mean by this? Mo Jingshan's black gaze had already shifted toward the interior of the hotel. His tone was as cold as frost. Hand Jinwan over. Han Tianyuan's expression was one of realization. He placed one hand in his pocket and casually took a step back, maintaining a safe distance. He sneered. Your woman is missing. Why did you come looking for me in the middle of the night? Could it be that CEO Mo has also noticed that my charm is too great, and your woman has been eyeing me for a long time? So you suspect that she would come looking for me in the middle of the night while you're not in the country? Mo Jingshan abruptly glanced at him. That gaze did not seem as though he was looking at a person. Instead, it seemed as though he was looking at a dead person. The author's words. The next chapter would begin collecting fees. The plot would be tight, and the pace would be steady. The floor would be filled with dog food. The plot would not be long-winded or melodramatic. As always, it would not disappoint anyone. Mo Tiantan and Jinwan were easy to raise. The entire novel would only cost 1 or 2 cups of milk tea. The bookstore's system was that once the book reached a certain number of words, the editor would arrange for it to be placed on the shelves. The fee would be 5 yuan per 1,000 words. Chapter 51. Mo Jingshan slowly retracted his gaze, unhurriedly adjusting the cuffs of his black suit. His dark and cold eyes were especially cold. If Jinwan loses even a single strand of hair tonight, your Han family's luck can be considered to have come to an end. Are you sure you want to take a gamble with me? Han Tinyuan's expression instantly stiffened. The calm expression on his face also began to crack. I'll give you one last chance. Mo Jingshan coldly narrowed his eyes, a murderous aura surging. Jinwan, where is she? Han Tianyuan cautiously said. I'm not sure. But earlier, I really saw her appear at the banquet. Someone poured something dirty into her cup, and then she crazily dragged several men into the elevator. Right now, she's probably playing happily in one of the rooms. Before he could finish his words, Han Tianyuan felt an ice-cold hand strangling his throat. A suffocating feeling instantly spread over him. He stiffly stared at Mo Jingshan. His movements were swift and clean. Earlier, he did not even have the chance to dodge. CEO Mo, a gentleman uses his mouth and not his hands. Besides, this matter has nothing to do with me. Mo Jingshan coldly smiled without speaking. His gaze became even colder. If a man were to have his neck broken like this on the streets, even if he died, it would be too unsightly. Although Han Tianyuan was confident that there was no evidence to prove that he was involved in tonight's incident, he still knew that tonight had really gone too far. Not to mention killing a person. Even if Mo Jingshan were to kill him in public, no one would dare to pursue his responsibility. CEO Mo, all of the hotel's doors have been sealed. Should we go in now? Shinmu approached Mo Jingshan's back, softly asking. Search room by room. In the hotel's banquet hall, Due to Mo Jingshan's appearance, the entire place was in a state of panic. The organizer and the manager of the hotel rushed over after hearing the news, but they were completely ignored by Mo Jingshan. Everyone was restrained in every corner of the venue. The entrance of the bar, that was adjacent to the hotel's first floor, was also sealed. Not even a fly could fly out. "You stop." Shenmu saw a waiter standing behind the crowd, his gaze furtive. He directly called the bodyguard to bring him over. The waiter was singled out. He was so frightened that his face turned green. The moment he saw Mo Jingshan's gaze, he trembled in fear and did not dare to raise his head. From his reaction, it was not hard to see that he had a guilty conscience. "Stand properly. Why are you shaking?" Shenmu kicked the back of the waiter's knee. "Mo President Mo." The waiter was so scared that his whole body tightened. He struggled to stand still and tried to use his honest confession to get away with it. "It has nothing to do with me. It really has nothing to do with me. I was also instructed by someone, President Mo. Please let me go." Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at him. "Where is she?" The waiter stiffly raised his hand and pointed upstairs. 10th floor. "It's on the 10th floor. Miss Zhou brought your wife up." In an instant, Mo Jingshan's figure had already stepped into the elevator. Everyone in the banquet hall exchanged looks. Usually, Mo Jingshan would not even be able to invite him to this kind of banquet. Today he suddenly appeared, and with such a frightening display of extravagance. What had happened? On the 10th floor of the hotel, all the doors to the rooms were kicked open one by one. When Mo Jingshan approached the innermost room that was locked from the outside, he suddenly heard a woman's dissolute and painful cries coming from inside. The bodyguards who had followed behind and Shenmu who had rushed overheard the sounds. Their expressions did not change, and they did not dare to look at Mo Jingshan's expression. Mo Jingshan only paused for a moment, calmly staring at the door in front of him. This voice was not Jinwan's. Even if someone had really drugged her with something dirty, even if she was delirious, this extremely unpleasant cry definitely could not be Jinwan's. Mo Jingshan directly kicked the door open. In an instant, a disgusting smell wafted out from the dark room. The moment he entered, his icy gaze landed on the woman, who was currently being pressed down by several naked men. The woman's entire body was bruised, her hair a mess, and her entire body was filthy. Various milky white liquids flowed down her body. Her lower body was currently being violently invaded by the men. Even though someone had barged in, they continued without stopping for a single moment. The moment the door opened, Shenmu instinctively closed his eyes. However, Mo Jingshan only coldly stared at the woman's face. Realizing that Mo Jingshan did not speak, Shenmu finally opened his eyes and saw the scene inside. The woman was crying and howling as she struggled, while the men appeared to have lost their rationality. This kind of scene was truly a rare sight. This was actually Zhou Yinyan? COMO. Shenmu returned to himself, abruptly turning to look at Mo Jingshan. "Continue searching." Mo Jingshan's eyes were pitch black and deep, his tone extremely mild. This hotel was a well-known 6-star hotel in Haicheng. There were many floors and rooms. If Jinwan had really been drugged, there was no way she could have escaped on her own. The group split up and searched the various floors. The surveillance cameras on the 10th floor and the elevator had been tampered with. All of a sudden, a call came from the surveillance room. "Found it. The surveillance cameras on the first floor aren't broken. 20 minutes ago, Mrs. Mo passed through the hotel corridor alone and went to the adjacent bar." In the private room, Jinwan pushed away the two perverted perverts. She struggled to get up, reaching out to pick up a bottle of beer from the coffee table and smashing it harshly. She raised it to face them, supporting herself against the sofa as she stood up. Her gaze was fierce, and her eyes were like torches. Scram! The moment she thought of how she had been carried to the sofa by the fat man earlier, she only felt disgusted. Her entire body felt uncomfortable. In these 20 minutes, she had experienced several struggles. The two perverts were fat and strong. Although they had drunk too much, they were in a much better state than her. She used the beer bottle as a weapon to protect herself, but it was only a temporary threat. The two men rushed forward at the same time, and fiercely pushed her onto the sofa. They quickly snatched the beer bottle from her hands and threw it on the ground. Scram, don't touch me. Motherf asterisk cur. Let's see how long you can last. One of the perverted men cursed and was about to tear her clothes. Jinwan lowered her head and harshly bit down on his hand. Ah, motherf asterisk cur. Smelly whore. I've given you face, but you don't want it. The perverted man painfully raised his hand and ruthlessly slapped her face. Jinwan was slapped to the side. Her vision darkened, but she forced herself to stay conscious. She took the opportunity to grab the fruit platter on the coffee table and retrieved a fruit knife. Without any hesitation, she viciously stabbed the man's thigh. Ah f asterisk ck. A miserable cry rang out. The perverted man jumped up in pain. The other man saw the knife in her hand and immediately reached out to snatch it away with a fierce expression. Jinwan continuously waved the fruit knife in her hand, randomly waving it at the two men's bodies. When they retracted their hands to avoid it, she stood up and used her other hand to grab another bottle of beer. She smashed it harshly against the coffee table. She raised the fruit knife with one hand and the sharp wine bottle with the other. Her eyes were filled with vigilance and did not dare to relax for a single moment. Chapter 52. There were bloodstains on the sofa. Jinwan sat on the sofa, covered in blood. Her hands were already injured. Her gaze was vicious, and her bloodied hands gripped tightly onto the fruit knife and wine bottle. She tried her best to prevent anyone from approaching. Her clothes were tattered, and she was in such a sorry state that it was almost impossible to tell how she originally looked. However, her body did not reveal anything that should not have been revealed. It was clear that she had not been taken advantage of easily. Jinwan's hair and face were unkempt. Her gaze was not clear, but her hands were resolutely raised high. Whoever dared to approach, she would stab them. Even if it was out of self-defense, she would not let go of the knife in her hands. Damn it, you stupid woman! The perverted man who had just been stabbed did not notice the movements in front of the door. He swore and was about to step forward to teach her a lesson. Mo Jingshan's gaze darkened. The bodyguards who had barged in immediately rushed up to hold the two men down. They mercilessly kicked them to the ground and used their feet to firmly step on them. There was no room for them to struggle at all. Ah! Miserable cries rang out. Jinwan appeared as though she did not notice the changes in front of her. She was like a female warrior charging through enemy lines. Her hands held onto a weapon that belonged to her as she watched her surroundings warily. Even if she could not stand up, she insisted on sitting up straight and refused to fall. Mo Jingshan looked at her and walked over. She was indeed the one at a disadvantage, but the two strong men obviously didn't get any benefits either. Both of them were injured. CEO Mo. Shinmu rushed to stop him. Miss G doesn't seem to be conscious right now. If you approach like this, you might get hurt. Why don't you let the bodyguards? Mo Jingshan did not speak, nor did he pause. As he walked forward, he stepped on the back of one of the men's hands. In an instant, the sound of bones cracking could be heard from that man's hand. Accompanied by that man's miserable cries, he took another step and stepped on the other man's hand. Only when he was about to approach Jinwan did Mo Jingshan speak without turning his head. His tone was cold and indifferent. Cripple these two men's hands. His words had just landed when the sounds of fingers and wrists being broken could be heard from behind him. The miserable cries cut through the air, causing one's heart to tremble. He looked at Jinwan, whose eyes were still full of wariness, and unhurriedly loosened his collar. Shinmu could tell that President Mo had really crossed his bottom line. Everyone who appeared at the banquet tonight, stay behind. Yes. Shinmu turned around and ordered the bodyguards. At the same time, he forcefully dragged the two half-dead men out of the room. Then, Shinmu looked at Mo Jingshan worriedly, and then at Jinwan, who had been holding the knife and the bottle. Although he was worried that CEO Mo would not use too much force to avoid hurting Jinwan, after thinking carefully, he felt that Jinwan, who was in such a panic, would not easily hurt him. After all, her movements were not orderly. After Shinmu ordered his men to clean up the scene, they left the room and quickly closed the door. The room returned to silence. Mo Jingshan just watched Jinwan. Her eyes were silent and empty, almost without focus. She only looked at the tall and slender figure in front of her expressionlessly. Jinwan. Mo Jingshan softly called her name. She stiffened and tightened her grip on the knife. Her eyes were filled with wariness as she said sternly, "Don't come over." Mo Jingshan walked over. Sensing his approach, Jinwan frantically shifted toward the sofa. Mo Jingshan took advantage of the moment she was distracted to directly grab her wrist. Just as she was about to stab him with the knife in her eyes, he exerted a slight force with his hands, causing the knife and bottle in her hands to fall to the ground. As she struggled in panic, he leaned down and pulled her into his embrace. "It's all right now. Don't be afraid." He held the back of her head with force, feeling the burning heat of her body. Jinwan was pressed into his embrace and did not move in a daze. "Be good. Nothing happened. You didn't suffer any losses. Everything is still fine." He hugged her, his low and comforting voice pressing against her ear. He gently and patiently kissed her earlobe, as though silently comforting her. "Baby, you were very brave today. I'm back. Don't be afraid, eh?" Jinwan's tense body gradually softened. She weakly leaned into his embrace, and the tears that she had not dared to shed immediately overflowed. She lay on his shoulder, leaning into his embrace. Her hands gripped tightly onto the back of his black trench coat, sobbing as she said, "They didn't touch me." "I know." Mo Jingshan furrowed his brows in heartache. He hugged her even tighter, as though he wanted to directly knead her into his body. "They didn't touch me." Perhaps she was still in a state of fear. She softly muttered again, her hands clenching into fists. Mo Jingshan lowered his gaze to look at her. He saw that her eyes were filled with tears and trembling uncontrollably. She bit her lower lip hard until it turned white, as though she was trying to maintain her rationality and hide her frailty under the fear. He raised his hand, using her tears to wipe away the blood stains on her face. Fortunately, it wasn't her blood. Jinwan was a girl who would not easily shed tears no matter what happened. Whether it was in the past or now, she was not someone who liked to cry. However, right now, she was instinctively sobbing in a daze, and her tears could not stop falling. There was no need to check the surveillance footage. Just from her current reaction, he could tell what kind of frightening experience she had just experienced. "It's all right." He helped her wipe away her tears, removing his jacket to cover her body. He carried her up. "Let's go back. I'll accompany you. Don't cry, be good." Jinwan's body was abnormally hot. Mo Jingshan's gaze was dark and cold. He was about to carry her away, when Jinwan helplessly buried her face in his neck. Her voice was hoarse and trembling as she said, "After being drugged with that kind of thing, if I don't do it with a man, what will happen?" He lowered his gaze to look at the little woman in his arms whose face was flushed red from the effects of the drug. His hand tightened around her waist. "So, what do you plan to do?" Jinwan furrowed her brows. Her burning body snuggled tightly in his embrace. Her hoarse voice was pressed against his ear. "Can you give me some ice water? I'm so hot. I want to drink ice water." Immediately, seeing that she was really uncomfortable, Mo Jingshan carried her out of the private room. Shen Mu, who was standing outside, turned back to see this scene. He immediately rushed over. "CEO Mo, are you going back in our car or?" "Go get a glass of ice water." Shen Mu's voice was stuck in his throat. He nodded and immediately went to get it. Chapter 53. Jinwan was about to tug on her own collar, when Mo Jingshan raised his hand to stop her. His black eyes watched her. Shen Mu brought the ice water over. He did not dare to look at Jinwan's current appearance. He tried his best to turn his face away in case he saw something he was not supposed to. "CEO Mo water," Shen Mu said softly. Mo Jingshan glanced at the chairs in the corridor. He received the water and carried Jinwan to sit down. He placed the glass by her lips. "Come, drink some water." Jinwan felt the iciness of the glass and hurriedly drank several mouthfuls. The iced water somewhat suppressed the heat in her body. She still weakly closed her eyes, leaning against Mo Jingshan's neck as though pleading for help. She softly whimpered, "It's so uncomfortable." Shinmu coughed. COMO, I'll drive you and Miss Ji to the hospital, or back to you. Mo Jingshan tightened the coat around Jinwan's body. His tone was cold. Deal with the people here. Release those who are not in the know. As for those who are in the know, and those who are conspirators, you know what to do. All right, I understand. Investigate clearly whether this matter has anything to do with the Zhou family other than Zhou Yinyan's own wishes. Investigate the cause, effect, and everyone involved. Don't leave a single one out. After speaking, Mo Jingshan placed the empty glass by the side. He carried Jinwan and walked out. Shinmu rushed to follow. COMO, do you need me to send a driver? Mo Jingshan glanced at the little woman in his arms who had been rubbing against his neck with a red face. He hoarsely said, There's no need. Mo Jingshan carried the half-conscious Jinwan into the car and helped her fasten her seatbelt. After confirming that she would not suddenly fall down, he touched her burning little face and sighed softly before closing the car door. After entering the car, Jinwan's head suddenly fell toward his side. She directly slid down the seat from the inside of the seatbelt. She was completely unable to sit still. Mo Jingshan furrowed his brows. He reached out to help her adjust the seatbelt, but Jinwan accidentally touched the buckle of the seatbelt. In an instant, she undid the seatbelt and slid down the seat. She almost fell on her butt. Mo Jingshan. He reached out to pull her up and bent over to pull the seatbelt. Jinwan suddenly opened her eyes and looked at him in confusion. Her cheeks were very, very red, and her eyes were shining with tears. This drug is too much. How can a man, in my eyes, become my husband's face? Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes to look at the little woman who was still spouting nonsense. Have you ever seen a face like mine? Just now, in the private room. She closed her eyes and said in a daze, I think I saw my husband coming to save me, but he's overseas. The earliest he should be back is tomorrow morning. How could he come? Very good. The cup of water he had fed her just now was for nothing. In the blink of an eye, he had become an illusion in her mind. The black ghost sped along the road, which was some distance away from the Imperial Garden. The car didn't stop when it passed by a hospital. Jinwan sat by the side with her head lowered, obviously enduring the heat and extreme emptiness. Mo Jingshan glanced at the high-class condominium that was closer to the Mo Corporation and drove over. The car quickly approached the condominium. Mo Jingshan heard the sound of the seat belt being unbuckled. Jinwan, who was originally sitting in the front passenger seat, suddenly wrapped her entire body around him. Her two hands hugged his neck tightly, pressing her hot and soft body against his. She unconsciously pressed against him, rubbing back and forth. Because of her posture and actions, the veins on Mo Jingshan's forehead bulged. I'm so hot. Hubby, help me. Jinwan hugged him, pressing her face against his neck. Hot breaths escaped from her mouth, kissing and nibbling messily on his neck. Hubby, hurry and help me. I'm going to die. I'm begging you. Mo Jingshan held the steering wheel with one hand, pulling her away from his embrace. He said hoarsely, Don't move about. I'm driving. Hot, so hot. Jinwan pressed against his body, unwilling to move away. She continued to press against his embrace. Her words were choked with sobs, and she instinctively rubbed against his body. Her two long, slender legs wrapped around his waist. Because of her actions, Mo Jingshan almost slammed on the brakes by the roadside. He glanced at Jinwan, who was wrapped around him like an octopus. His gaze deepened. Sit back first. Be obedient. We'll be there soon, eh? No. I'm so hot, so hot, so hot, so hot, so hot. Jinwan hugged his neck tightly with one hand, while her other hand moved up and down his body. Suddenly she reached for his collar. She did not care about anything else, and moved her hand along his skin. The moment she touched his taut chest, she felt even more hot and uncomfortable. She wanted nothing more than to crawl between his arms and sit on his body. Thinking of this, she found it increasingly difficult to control herself. She was already prepared to shift her butt over. Mo Jingshan endured it and forced himself to hold back, pushing her back to the front passenger seat. Mo Jingshan held her down with one hand and pressed against the steering wheel with the other. He warned with a heavy voice, Be obedient. Jinwan did not speak. She completely ignored his warning. She did not know where her strength came from, but she crawled out from under his hand like a mudfish. Unable to leave the front passenger seat, she suddenly moved her head over to rest on his lap. The moment Mo Jingshan lowered his gaze, she reached out with her slender, white hand to unbuckle his belt. Previously, she had unbuckled this thing, but this belt seemed to be different from before. She fiddled with it for a long time, but could not undo it. Mo Jingshan pressed her hand down. The car drove at a frightening speed into the condominium's underground parking lot. Even when the car stopped, Jinwan still did not realize where she was. It was only when the car door opened, and she was carried out that she stared at the man who carried her into the elevator with a dumbfounded expression. Hubby. Jinwan's voice was filled with grievance. She was already feeling so uncomfortable. Why did he not bring her home? Mo Jingshan softly responded. His voice was heavy and hoarse. I'm going to die from the heat. It was still the same low and mild response, but it was even lower and hoarser. Jinwan wanted to ask why he did not bring her home. She had never been here before, but she could not speak much. Every time she wanted to speak, she would almost cry out. In the end, she just bit her lips and looked pitifully at the man who could look, but could not eat. At this moment, she more or less came to a realization. Did Mo Jingshan return from a business trip? He said 3 days. And he really did it. He was really a punctual husband. Chapter 54. In the unfamiliar room, it was so dark that she could not even see her own fingers. Jinwan subconsciously raised her head and kissed him. The moment she kissed him, she could not pull away. Her hands circled around his neck in a death grip. The room door was slammed shut with a pung. The lights were not turned on yet. Jinwan's urgent kiss gradually moved downwards, landing on his Adam's apple. The man who had always been able to control himself gave a muffled groan. Her chin was abruptly pinched by him. His low and hoarse voice landed by her ears. You want it? Jinwan had completely lost her rationality as she nodded in his arms. In order to prove that she was really in a hurry, her hands randomly tugged at the expensive buttons on his shirt. When she could not pull them off, she opened her mouth and bit down hard. In the darkness, Mo Jingshan abruptly carried her in. Even though it was pitch black, he was still able to accurately find the direction of the bedroom. Jinwan was so anxious that she could no longer differentiate between north, south, east, and west. The man's unique cold fragrance floated on her face. All of her senses were concentrated, and there were only 2 words in her mind. Sleep with him. Sleep with him. Sleep with him. Jinwan's arms remained tightly wrapped around his neck. Her coat had long fallen to the ground when she entered. Her messy dress was thrown into the air and slowly fell to the ground. See? Jinwan suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. The man abruptly stood up, and the bedside lamp in the bedroom was instantly turned on. The warm light shone on the 2 of them. The light was not blinding, and Jinwan only felt the pain in her hand for a moment. She did not want to stop all of this. She struggled to sit up and tugged at his clothes. Don't stop. However, the moment her hand reached out, it was caught by him. Mo Jingshan glanced at her flushed and impatient expression. He held her hand and lowered his eyes to look at the 2 faint wounds on her palm and fingers. Earlier, when she was holding the fruit knife and the wine bottle, she had accidentally cut her own hand. The brightest light in the bedroom was suddenly turned on. Jinwan instinctively narrowed her eyes. She blankly watched as the man's figure walked out in front of her. Left. Just like that. She panicked. The environment here was unfamiliar, and she was currently in a daze. She did not have much sense of security. In a panic, she stumbled up from the bed and staggered to the bedroom door, only to see Mo Jingshan come back with something that looked like a medicine box. Jinwan's gaze was slightly dazed as she stared at the medicine box in his hands. She was not wearing any clothes. She stood there as though she was completely unaware. Mo Jingshan's throat moved as he watched. He said hoarsely, "Go back and sit properly." Jinwan and Mo Jingshan's eyes widened as he grabbed onto the door and threw her back onto the bed. He forcefully held onto her hands. And he. He, Mo. G. G was not. G said, emoji, he. He. He used iodophor to disinfect her hands. Jinwon did not recognize the other powder in his hands. She was dazed. Jinwon could barely make out the words Nambai Yao. Looking at the well-dressed man who was applying medicine on her hand, Jinwon's expression that was about to cry changed, and she suddenly grinned. What are you laughing at? Mo Jingshan asked calmly when he saw that she was no different from being drunk after being drugged. Hubby, Jinwon tilted her head. While he was applying the bandage, she stretched out her little feet toward his leg. Her toes moved back and forth on his leg. Mo Jingshan's expression did not change. His hands continued to steadily and orderly apply the bandage. Don't move. She heard the man's low and heavy voice carry a hint of warning. Jinwon refused to listen. In her previous life, she did not have a chance to have a good time with him. This life had just begun. Since they had already come this far, there was nothing to be shy about. That day on the street, she had thought in her heart that in this life, she wanted to give birth to Mo Jingshan's children. Give birth to many children. Her heart was in a mess, and the movements of her feet became more and more excessive. She even looked at him with coquettish eyes and giggles. Don't mess around. Hubby, be more obedient. Hubby, Jinwon, whose rationality had been completely used up, used all her skills. She raised her little feet and climbed up his abdomen. Chapter 55. It seemed like she had never seen him completely naked, but just from this touch, she knew that Mo Jingshan was definitely a top quality. At the thought that this man was hers and only hers, she was even more excited and wanted to entangle him with her hands and feet. Put your hands down. It was as though Mo Jingshan was instructing a primary school student. He sternly took the medicine box away from her hand to prevent her from knocking it over. He had just moved the medicine box to the bedside table when Jinwon unsteadily got off the bed and pounced toward him. She hugged him from behind and rubbed her hot little face against his back. Her voice carried a hint of anxiousness as she sobbed. She suddenly reached out and pushed away the medicine box he was pressing on the table. She squeezed in front of him and bit the collar of his shirt fiercely. She wrapped her arms and legs around him and kissed his chin. In the next moment, Jinwon was abruptly thrown onto the bed by the man. Before she could react, she heard Mo Jingshan speak hoarsely by her ear, "Little vixen." As soon as he finished speaking, he heard the sound of a belt falling to the ground. Women's skirts, men's trousers, shirts, all scattered on the ground mixed together. The man covered her body, his eyes dark and scorching. The touch of the scorching palm made her whole body go limp. Her eyes were filled with tears. She was moved and trembling. Mo Jingshan let out a low chuckle from his chest. Just as she was about to ask him what he was laughing at, the man suddenly, without any hesitation, crashed into her. Jinwon's two hands clung onto his shoulders. For a moment, she was unable to get used to it. She moaned weakly, and her voice was like a cat's meow. It was soft and gentle, and her hoarse voice undoubtedly hooked the man's nerves. Jinwon was woken up with a start in the morning. The sky had been bright for a long time, and she abruptly opened her eyes. In an unfamiliar room with a bright window, she slowly sat up, glancing at the man's light gray shirt she was wearing. She could still smell Mo Jingshan's clear scent in the air. Although this was not the Yew Garden, she vaguely remembered that last night, Mo Jingshan had carried her to the bathroom to take a shower. Because there were no women's clothes here, he gave her a shirt. The sleeves of the shirt were very long, covering the back of his hand, and only the tips of his fingers could be seen. This shirt size belonged to Mo Jingshan. Everything that had happened last night replayed in her mind. From the bedroom to the living room, from the bed to the sofa, to the bathroom, and finally back to the bed. In the end, she went from being pestered at the very beginning to being completely controlled by him. Unable to control herself, she could not imagine how long her weak resistance would have lasted if Mo Jingshan had not arrived in time. "You're awake." The man's clear and melodious voice suddenly sounded in front of the door. Jinwon raised her eyes with a jerk, only to see Mo Jingshan's figure flash by the door. And then it was still his voice outside. Get up for breakfast. She stayed in bed for a long time before she came back to her senses. She didn't have time to ask more questions, so she quickly got out of bed. Jinwan found the bathroom in the bedroom. After a simple wash, she came out wearing the shirt that covered half her thighs. The aroma of food wafted in the dining room adjacent to the living room, but Jinwan looked out through the huge floor-to-ceiling window in the living room. This place seemed to be very close to the Mo Corporation. The bustling city center was in front of her, but due to the height, she could not hear any noise. Downstairs was a large green garden, and the asphalt road was also very neat and tidy. It was obvious that this was a very high-class apartment district. This was Mo Jingshan's residence near the company before he got married. After she got married, she had always stayed in the U Garden, because that was their matrimonial home. In the past, she did not understand Mo Jingshan well enough, so she did not even know of this place's existence. Turning around, Jinwan's attention was once again attracted by the style of the room. This place was not as luxurious as the U Garden. The U Garden was a residence set by the Mo family's elders. Back then, she did not participate in the renovation. Since it was comfortable, she did not care too much. But here, it was clean and simple, similar to Mo Jingshan's own low-profile style. However, the color of the entire house was slightly cold. The aroma from the dining room added some liveliness to the cold colors. Don't stand there in a daze. Come over, eat something. Oh. Jinwan turned toward the dining room, stopping by the dining table. Looking at the simple yet nutritious breakfast on the table, Jinwan scanned the surroundings. This breakfast did not look like takeaway, and there did not seem to be any servants or nannies around. Could it be that this breakfast, you made it? She looked at the man inside in astonishment. Mo Jingshan had already returned to his prim and proper appearance. However, when he helped her bring out the bowls and chopsticks, there was a hint of human nature to him. When he walked over, the French buttons on his shirt were illuminated by the sunlight from the window, revealing a bright blue light. Could it be that you sleepwalked into the kitchen to make it? Mo Jingshan placed the cutlery on the table in front of her. This, Mo Jingshan personally made breakfast? Jinwan felt that she was about to find a hole to hide in. Her understanding of him was really just a little. Was there anything in this world that he did not know how to do? She did not eat much last night, and her stomach was currently not feeling well. Jinwan quietly sat by the dining table. Just by smelling the aroma, she knew that it would definitely be delicious. She could not help but sigh. Did you call me yesterday as soon as you got off the plane? Jinwan recalled the call he had made yesterday when Qianjun was about to explode. Mo Jingshan furrowed his brows. He did not answer but instead asked, "That dinner party, who gave you the invitation?" Han Tianyuan. He did not speak further. Based on his abilities, it would be easy for him to find out the entire story. After all, Jinwan had just transferred Han Tianyuan's 2 companies into her hands. It was impossible for Mo Jingshan to not know about this. She wanted to grow wings and fly away, and he did not stop her. This kind of respect and indulgence, Jinwan felt satisfied in her heart. But what happened last night? Thankfully, he had rushed over. Did you go to the 10th floor of the hotel last night? At that time, Zhou Yinyan wanted to push me into that room. In the end, I was the one who pushed her in. Jinwan took a bite of the golden fried egg that was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. She softly asked, "How is she?" Mo Jingshan's voice was cold. "Half dead. From today onwards, you probably won't have the chance to see her again. I'll handle it." Jinwan gazed at the handsome face in front of her. Originally, she wanted to ask more about what happened yesterday, but it was clear that Mo Jingshan did not plan on leaving a shadow in her heart. Thankfully, nothing irreversible happened. From his cold tone, it seemed like the Han and Zhou families would not be able to escape from this calamity. Jinwan was not a saint. If others treated her unkindly and unjustly, she would definitely not sit and wait for death. With her husband supporting her, this feeling was truly indescribably blissful. However, when she was showering earlier, she saw the marks he left on her body. Jinwan took another bite of the fried egg, but her expression was more or less uncomfortable. She could still recall everything from last night. In her entire life, she had never imagined that she would become like that. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.